All right. Okay, at this time, I'd like to call the Ascension Parish Home Rule Charter Revision Committee meeting to order. We'll start off with the invocation, Reverend Burnett, and Mr. Dawson with the pledge.
Father God, we thank you, Lord God, again for this gathering tonight. We pray that everything goes decently in order, Lord God. Father God, we pray, Lord God, that we move, Lord God, in the betterment and citizens of the parish, Lord God, and we thank you for these things in Jesus' name. We pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, now we'll proceed with the roll call.
Mr. Dawson.
Here.
Mr. Burnett.
Here.
Mr. Petey.
Here.
Mr. Trosclair.
Here.
Mr. Jarrow.
Here.
Mr. Kazare.
Here.
Ms. Casso.
Here.
Mr. Lawler. Mr. Martinez. Ms. Laurent. Mr. Hernandez.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
3 absent.
Okay, for the record, Ms. Laurent is ill today, and she sent a message that she could not be with us today. Hopefully, she'll be with us at the next meeting. Okay, that being said, it's now time for the public comment. And we have one speaker thus far, Mr. Jeff Pettit. Please come forward.
Looking at the way this committee came about, there's no provisions in our home rule charter for a committee of the whole. This was created by one council member. This is something that I think y'all should look at. There's also no mention of a home rule charter commission in the home rule charter that I can find. Is it something we want to codify in our home rule charter? The method we go about repealing? Because at present, there's only 2 methods for this to come about. And that's a supermajority vote of the council or a petition of the people, neither of which happened that brought this committee together. What we had that brought this committee together, as far as I can tell, is 12 guys at a crawfish boil. So what about 12 ladies at a jambalaya cook-off? I mean, what's the procedure to bring a committee of the whole or home rule charter commission together going forward? If a change happens now, what's the procedure in the future? Is it all going to be food related? Is it all going to be guys? Is there going to be any diversity there? Is there going to be method to it? Something I think y'all should look at. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, next we'll have Article 9, Amendment or Repeal. Section 9-.01, Origination. An amendment to or the repeal of this charter may be proposed by at least 2/3 of the members of the governing authority or by a petition.
I would move that we leave it as is.
Okay.
Second.
Moved and second, Mr. P.T. and Mr. Lawler. Any opposition, any further discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Not any opposition to the motion. Any opposition?
Mr. PT already broke his microphone, that's all.
Okay.
Bill Doc Satterley.
Okay. Okay, hearing none. Section 901, origination, will stay as is. Section 902, procedure by petition. If the proposed amendment or repeal is proposed by petition, the following procedure shall be followed. 1, any qualified elector may submit the proposal to the governing authority, which shall specify within 30 days a form of petition for circulation with the date of approval recorded. The petition shall contain the full text of the proposed amendment or repeal. Number 2, the signature of at least 33% of the qualified electors as of the date of submission shall be obtained. After each signature, the address or district and precinct of the signer and the date of signing shall be noted. Each person circulating the petition shall attach an affidavit stating the number of signers and verifying that each signature was made in the presence of the circulator. Number 3, the petition shall be filed at the office of the governing authority within 60 days of the specification of the form of the petition. Within 30 days thereafter, the governing authority shall order the register of voters to complete a canvass of the signatures to determine sufficiency and authenticity. If the number of signatures is found to be insufficient or unauthentic, the petition shall be denied. If the petition is deficient as to form, the governing authority shall give written notice to the person filing the petition as to the deficiencies. 30 days shall be allowed to correct deficiencies. The final sufficiency of the petition shall be determined by the governing authority. Such proposals shall be adopted when approved by a majority of the electors voting thereon and shall become effective within 30 days following the promulgation of the election results. That is the totality of the procedure for petition section 9-02. Any comments, any questions? If not, we'll entertain a motion. Mr. Dawson?
Well, I think we should look at this. 33% is a very high hurdle. I've looked a little bit at some of the recommendations, and the recommendations are, 10 or about half of that, 10 to 15% is more like what, most of the recommendations you see on a nationwide level are. So, I would say I would start the conversation at reducing that to 15% of the total registered voters at the last parish-wide election.
Okay. Mr. P.T.
Are you talking about the number of qualified electors on the rolls, or?
This is to petition
I understand that, but I'm asking the number you're talking about. When you said the number of voters in the last election, you're talking about the number of registered qualified electors that are on the voters' rolls. Okay.
Total registered voters at the last parish-wide election.
Because I've seen some other, I don't know if RP was talking about this a while back, tying it to the number of actual voters in the last election, but I don't know how you would do that. But even 15%, you're talking about probably over 10,000 people, which is a very hefty burden. I think what Mr. Pettit was talking about is the precedent. And, we hear a lot about precedent, particularly when it suits, and this is a fresh topic, when it suits the planning and zoning to put forward some precedent, spurious and made out of whole cloth. I think that's what Mr. Pettit is talking about. And some people do take note when this process has been flawed. From the very outset, it's been flawed. Now,
I'd like to have a point of order. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring a point of order. Part of Robert's rules is that we have to address, the discussion has to address the motion at hand. You can't talk about previous motions or previous actions.
I think everything I'm saying, it relates directly to the motion at hand. And we're talking about, if we're going to suggest changing it, there's any kind of ways we can change it. Then we can do like I started with before I was interrupting Mr. Dawson, who's obviously on edge right now. There's all kinds of different methodology.
Another point of order, Mr. Chairman, is he can't call my name. He can't
Okay.
address another member of this committee directly.
Okay, before it gets edgy, let's do this.
I'm not edgy.
Well,
My colleague to the right is edgy,
We
not me.
adopted these Robert's Rules of Order. I'd like to, if you'd like,
Okay.
I'll read.
It's not edgy.
let's,
Well, if my colleague to the right would like to read something, go ahead and read the resolution that started this committee when you read Robert's Rules of Order. And that'll evidence some of the irritation, for lack of a better word, some of the angst felt by some people in this parish. Now, what we're talking about is 9-02 and the methodology to amend the charter, which was, those rules were suspended for a group.
Again, we're not talking about,
just
he's making accusations here that are simply not
I'm going to ask you to
substantiated.
make a ruling, Mr. Weezer, and I'd like to finish my thoughts.
let's keep
That are
comments
specifically on topic.
specifically to what we're talking about, 9-02.
Right.
Which is procedure by petition.
Right, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay. I
Okay?
mean,
And I have not deviated from that. Whether or not my colleague to the right will admit that or not, I have not deviated from that. We're talking about this procedure that is, as far as I've understood the resolution, we're here to tweak the existing charter, and the existing charter 9-02, I think, could use some tweaking because it is overly burdensome. ORPEC, if I remember correctly, had suggested some changes to 9-01 at 2, but I think what they meant was 9-02. And they referenced a legislative initiative to lower the burden to recall elected official, which is at 33% as well. And that is onerous, I think. I don't know if the legislation got through the House and the Senate, but, you know, there were sliding scales about having to do with the population numbers. I don't know if that's going to become law or not, but that was an initiative, and ORPEC tied their suggestion to that legislation aimed at the recall. If we are, you know, we do have numbers here. There's approximately 75,000 registered voters, qualified electors in the parish. 33% is 25,000. Can we discuss a number that we think is right? I can tell you, you know, I haven't seen a parish election that drew 50% turnout. I can't remember one.
as I appreciate it, it has been stated the possibility of looking at 15% of the registered voters.
Well, is that number, I know,
electorate.
I think earlier I threw out a number that's even lower than that. I mean, 10% would be 75,000 on a petition. You know, what's the right, I would look at it,
7,500.
75.
yeah, 10% would be
7,500.
7,500, right.
Yes.
Right. That's what I said. I thought I suggested at one point early in one of the early meetings that 10% may be a better number. Because what we're dealing with is actual numbers, okay? The registrar will tell you that his voter rolls, you know, you've got a certain percentage of people that are no longer registered voters, or they're still registered, but they're not really voters in the parish. So what is the operative number? And we're not beating a dead dog here, we're not dragging a dead horse in, but what's the right number? What's the number of people in this parish who, when they want to change their charter, what's the right number to start that process? Because I can tell you that it's more than the people who have spoken out in favor of this, what we're here for. Now, what's the right number? Is it 5,000? Is it 25,000? What's that number? When do people have access to the process where they can address their form of government?
Per this conversation.
And that's just for conversation's sake, and I'll close
Okay.
my comments.
Per this conversation, it has been suggested the possibility of 15% brought to the floor, to the committee by Mr. Dawson. So as we appreciate it, 15% is what we're navigating through right now about the possibility of it being.
Right,
that
and that's
particular
why I've
percentage of the
tried to
electorate.
address, that's why I've tried to address my comments, is 15% the right number? Because that's excessive, you know, given, you know, we don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, I get all that, but what is the right number that gives people access to their government to try to change their government? Because it's more than what we're dealing with in this room, it's more than we're dealing with people watching us on TV, it's more than people who are even aware that this is going on in this parish. So I would suggest that 15%, 33%, we've kind of established is 25,000 signatures on a petition. That'll never happen. 15% is less than half of that, so you're still talking about 11,000 signatures on a petition. That will never happen. 10% is 7,500 signatures on a petition. That will never happen in this parish, not in conformity to this. So what is the number? I would suggest all those numbers are too high, given the precedent that Mr. Pettit was talking about a couple minutes ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Mr. Jarrow?
Yes, sir. Just looking at going from a 33% number, I would like to, I just want, I'm not saying we don't have good information. I just would like some valid numbers. Is the 75,000 correct? And I just want to be 100% sure of that if we're going to go with percentages. But I think it's a fair amount to go from 33 to 15. I understand that we need to make it simpler. I agree with that. 33 is way too high. But I also don't want it to where every time we turn around, a group gets together and they're coming about and doing this. So I just think 15 was just like he said, 15 is a good number, I think.
Okay. Any other comments? Mr. Lawler and Mr. Hernandez?
I can agree with the 15. one of my concerns is I thought I heard somebody speaking about or tying it to the previous vote, number of voters. I think that's a bad idea. If we start tying it to a specific vote, it's ripe for manipulation. If you know that you have a low turnout item on the ballot, if you time things right, you may only have to get 500, 600, 700 signatures. So it has to be tied to the total number of registered voters within the parish. 15%, I think, is a good number. It can't be too low. Once again, it's incumbent upon the people that are involved with this parish to go out and vote. You know, I look out at the crowd tonight, and there are, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, total of 7 people here. You know, I would like to see more people here, and what that tells me is if we put the number at 2%, you may not have enough people to come out and sign these things. But I think at 15%, that's a pretty safe amount right there.
Thank you. Mr. Hernandez.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just wanting to point out in 2002 revision, PAR, Public Affairs Research Council of Louisiana, had put some percentages in their report that goes anywhere from 10% in Livingston to 20% in St. Tammany. So I think 15% is kind of right there in that sweet spot. So.
Thank you. Any further comments? Ms. Cazzo?
No, I agree.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm comfortable with, I think 15% is a real sweet spot.
Okay. Mr. Dawson, you put that
So
in
I'll
motion?
make that motion that we change 33 to 15%.
I'll second that.
I was going to second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Dawson, second by Ms. Cazzo.
That's
Yeah,
of
simply-
registered voters, right?
Yes.
Of
But I think it's
voters.
registered, what I had said is registered voters at the last parish-wide election.
Correct.
So it's not tied to how many people voted. I just want to be clear. I know exactly what you're saying. I just want to be clear so everybody understands in the public out there,
Yeah.
all 7 of y'all, everybody watching on TV, is that it's not the number of people that vote in the last election.
No.
It's the number of people that were qualified to vote, whether or not they voted or not.
Your total electorate.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Okay, it's been moved and second. Any opposition to the motion? Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion is hereby adopted. Okay, next is that of Section 9-03, election. The ordinance proposing an amendment or repeal shall provide for submission to the qualified electors. The governing authority shall call the election to be held at the earliest date provided by law after enactment of the ordinance or the final sufficiency of the petition is determined. Such proposal shall be adopted when approved by a majority of the electors voting thereon and shall become effective within 30 days following promulgation of the election results. Any comments? Any questions? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
I would make one, excuse me.
Mr. Dawson?
Chairman. You know, we had this, on the only charter amendment that we've done, you know, I think since the charter was adopted, you know, we had this ordinance to where we had to hold the ordinance because of this rule that it has to be at the very next election, the next possible election. I mean, I'm just bringing that up. You know, if we wanted to, do you remember that, Aaron?
Yes.
So I don't think I have an issue with it because somebody might go election hunting if you didn't have that in there.
Okay. Any further comments or discussion? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
Motion to leave as it is.
Moved by Ms. Cazzo.
Second that.
Okay. Second by Mr. Trosclair. Any opposition to the motion? Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion is hereby adopted. Section 9-04, restrictions. A, substantially the same proposal to amend or repeal this charter shall not be submitted to the electors more frequently than every 2 years, excuse me. B, No amendment shall reduce the term for which any official was elected or the salary of any such official during his term. Any questions? Any comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to keep that the same.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Trosclair, by Mr. Lawler, and second by Ms. Cazzo. I don't know why I do that. Any opposition to the motion?
I think it's
Any
for fun.
opposition? Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion is hereby adopted. I know you guys are gonna haunt me after this is over with. All right, next section is Article 10, Transitional Provisions. Section 10-01, Effective Date. Following a referendum at which this charter is approved by a majority of those electors of the parish of Ascension voting in such election, this charter shall become fully effective on the first Monday after January 1st, that's 1994. Upon approval of the charter by the voters of Ascension Parish, the incumbent police jurors, parish council persons, shall continue to serve in that capacity until the time the first president assumes office. At that time, the police jurors shall assume the positions of council members and shall function in accordance with the provisions of this charter. The terms of the first council members shall end at the expiration date of their current elective terms. That is section 10-01, effective date. Any comments?
Can we take this out?
We have the authority to do so if we would like to.
I mean, is there any need for this now?
It is dated January 1994. If it's the recommendation to pull this out, the effective date out, by majority members of this committee, then we can certainly forward that to the parish council. If you all would like to discuss it further, Mr. Jarrow?
Just like to make sure that there wasn't some reason for it to still be there. There wasn't any recommendation by the past two committees, so I'm wondering why it's still there. So I agree, if it doesn't need to be there, we can get rid of it, but let's make sure it doesn't need to be there.
Let's do, Mr. PT.
It's just an effective date thing. It's operative. It makes the ordinance, the charter operative. I would suggest if we are, you can be putting extensive changes on the ballot for the citizens to vote upon. You probably should include something replacing that with when the new charter provisions would be enacted. So you would just attach it to, just a housekeeping matter. So
yes,
I would suggest that if we're going to be proposing, whatever we're going to be proposing for inclusion on the ballot, we would include the updated language for section 10-01.
Okay. Well, let it be reflective that we would include this in our recommendations to the council, that an effective date, a more current effective, well, the current effective date would be included. Okay, we can get that in a motion form, and we can vote it in.
Make a motion.
Moved by Mr. PT.
Second.
Second by Mr. Jarrow. Any opposition to that motion? Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion is hereby carried. Section 10-02, election of the president. Following the approval of this charter by the electors of Ascension Parish and at the earliest date permitted by law, the president shall be elected in accordance with the election laws of the state of Louisiana for a term coincident with the remaining term of office of the then serving members of the police jury. The initial term of office of the president shall commence on the effective date of this charter. Upon election and qualification for the initial term provided herein, the president shall thereupon become the president of the parish, vested with all of the powers and authorities set forth in this charter. At the end of the initial term of office, the president shall be elected and hold office for a term of 4 years. Any questions, any comments? If not, we'll entertain a motion for approval.
I'd say we leave it as is, motion.
Motion by Mr. PT to leave it as is. Second
Second.
by Mr. Hernandez. Any opposition to the motion? Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing none. Section 10-02, election of the president is hereby moved on. Section 10-03, continuation of actions, franchises, contracts, licenses, and ordinances, repeal of conflicting ordinances. A, all writs, actions, suits, civil or criminal proceedings, liabilities, prosecutions, judgments, sentences, contracts, franchises, debts, and obligations due by the parish, right or causes of action, claims, demands, titles, and rights existing on the effective date of this charter shall continue unaffected. B, all existing ordinances not in conflict with this charter shall remain in full force and effect until amended or repealed by the governing authority or until they expire by their own limitation. All acts of the prior governing authority and all administrative rules and regulations not in conflict with this charter shall remain in full force in effect until changed or repealed. C, all existing ordinances in conflict with this charter are repealed upon its effective date. That is section 10-03. Any comments, any questions, further clarification? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
Motion to leave as is.
Second.
Okay, it was moved by, I'm sorry, my head was down.
Burnett.
Burnett, by member Burnett, second by Mr. PT, to leave as is. That's section 10-03. Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing no opposition, the motion is hereby carried. Section 10-04, charter ballot. The ballot form for the referendum on this proposed charter shall be yes or no. Shall a home rule charter and plan of government of the parish of Ascension, Louisiana, as prepared and submitted by the duly constituted Charter Commission according to Article 6, Section 5 of the Constitution, be approved and adopted in such form and substance as the final draft copy on file with the Secretary of the Police Jury of the parish of Ascension, be that be Parish Council, Louisiana, and published in the official journal of the parish of Ascension, Louisiana. And that would have an answer yes or no. Questions or comments? Section 1004, charter ballot. Just basically displaying how it would be articulated. Ms. Cazzo.
I would think this can just be stricken from the charter.
Okay.
I mean, unless there's some reason why it cannot, but this is relevant only to the
Well,
election at the time.
it's going to be the same thing. I mean, you're having a new election, so you maybe have substitute language where you can replace it. So I would, if that's a motion, I'll second it. And
I'll be happy to make it in the form of a motion that this language be struck and that any future language would be added here.
and I will be even happier to second.
All right. Okay, it's been moved by Ms. Cazzo, second by Mr. PT. Any opposition to the motion? Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing none, section 10-04, charter ballot is hereby removed. All right. Section 11, Article 11, miscellaneous provisions. 11-01, severability. If any provision of this charter is declared invalid for any reason, it shall not affect the validity of this charter or any other provisions thereof.
I move that be left as read.
Moved by Ms. Cazzo,
Second.
by Mr. PT. Any opposition? Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing none, the motion is hereby adopted. That concludes the charter in its entirety as we have navigated from the beginning to the end of it. At this time, we will move to the presentation by the ABA. Will those presenters please come forward and identify yourselves into the record? You have 30 minutes, and then there will be a question and answer series thereafter, forum thereafter.
Good afternoon. I'm Sam Gaston. I'm the city manager for the city of Mountain Brook, Alabama, and I was asked by ICMA to come and speak to you tonight about the benefits of professional management for your community. And I think we've got a PowerPoint here going to be put up. Great. See here. They asked me to put a little bio up before I start my presentation. I have been the city manager of Mountain Brook, Alabama for 25 years. I started my career as a planner in Decatur, Alabama, and then I moved to become a assistant manager and planning director in 2 communities before I became a city manager in Georgia. I am an Auburn graduate, and I am still in denial about the Auburn meltdown last year in Baton Rouge. So, anyway.
That worked just fine.
Sir?
That worked just fine.
Yes. Yep, maybe it was. But I did have the opportunity to serve as president of ICMA a few years ago. But anyway, we're going to talk tonight about the council manager form of government and what is it and what does it mean to your community and what are the benefits to your community. Well, the council manager form of government, it combines strong political leadership by an elected policy board, which would be your parish council or a city council, and then strong administrative leadership by a professional, non-political, professional city or county manager. And today, the council manager form of government, we use kind of a business structure where the shareholders are you, the voters, and the taxpayers of the parish or the city. They in turn elect a board of directors or policy board, which is your city council or your parish committee, and then they in turn employ a CEO, which is the city or county manager, to run the day-to-day operations. And today we're seeing more and more communities go to this form of government because they realize the need to have professional management rather than political management of their communities. The council manager form of government has almost 3,800 U.S. cities and counties operating under this form of government, and 819 counties under the true council manager form of government. 44% of counties have either a county manager or a county administrator. You may ask, what is the history of the city manager form of government? Well, it was formed out of the progressive reform movement that entered the United States in the late 1890s and early 1900s. The City Beautiful movement, because a lot of city and county governments were very corrupt at that time, inefficient political machines that controlled city politics. There was graft and there was inefficiencies. And the reformers, they utilized the business community to make changes at the local level, and even their chamber of commerces. Because people in business, you know how to get the most out of every dollar. You know how to perform good customer service. You know how to provide and deliver results, and your local government should do the same. What are the duties of a city manager? Well, the city manager or the county manager, they serve as the administrative head of your local government. They coordinate the day-to-day operations of your local government. They supervise the department heads. And they appoint and they remove employees as necessary. And they prepare the annual budget, present it to the governing body, and then the governing body adopts it, and then it's up to the manager and their staff to administer it through the departments of the county or the city. We make recommendations to the governing body as far as helping them develop policy. We develop policy options for them to consider. And then once that policy is adopted, it's up to the manager to implement it through the county workforce. We enforce all laws and ordinances of the city, all the rules and regulations. We attend all your council or commission meetings, and we keep the governing body informed about what's going on in the community and also in the government structure. Now, what are the benefits if you have a professional manager running your organization as opposed to political management? Well, appointed managers usually have graduate degrees in public administration, some in community planning, a few MBAs, and even law degrees, and we serve as change agents for your local government structure because you will see greater professionalism in your county workforce if you have professional management. Your employees will be better paid and they'll be better trained under the council manager form of government than the strong mayor form of government or parish council form of government. Employees, though, they're hired based on their education and experience, and they're not hired for political reasons. And your service deliveries of your county or city will be on what's best for the city and for the citizens and not for political reasons. And then all members of your governing body will have an equal say in the operations of your city and county operations. By having a manager, it allows the governing body to concentrate on establishing policy and a vision for your community, as opposed to being involved in administration. You will see centralized purchasing procedures will be implemented and budgeting procedures, and you'll see consolidation of departments. If you ever look at a mayor-council form of government, as far as their organizational structure, you'll see a lot more small departments. While in the council-manager form of government, a lot of those small departments have been collapsed under the larger departments to have a better span of control for the manager and his staff. You will have a greater and higher level of innovation in your county and city operations, and then there will be a greater emphasis on long-range planning, strategic planning, and capital improvement planning, because you're going to look to the future, you're going to plan for the future, and you're going to anticipate the future. You will have an emphasis on goal setting and performance measuring, and you will benchmark your community against comparable communities. See, how are we doing? How do we stack up against comparable communities? You will see more accountability. You will see transparency, more equity, and fairness in your local government service. And then local government managers, especially ICMA members, we are committed to good public service and good government. And we believe in solving problems, and we believe in improving the quality of life for the communities we serve. And last but not least, you will have less politics in the administration of your city or county government by having professional management. Now let's look and contrast the council manager form of government with the strong mayor or strong county commission form of government. As far as the chief executive officer, the manager is the chief executive officer appointed by the entire governing body and serves the entire governing body based on their expertise, their education, and their experience. Under a strong mayor form of government, the mayor or parish commission chairman is the executive officer elected by the residents, but there's no special education, training, or even experience required. And the chief executive does not necessarily serve the governing body or the rest of the council. Also, you elect a mayor or county commission chairman based on their charisma, their vision for the community, and their personality, not because they are a good manager. Now, as far as separation of politics and administration, under the council manager form of government, the council determines policy as a body, as a whole. And then the manager helps recommends and presents options to them and then implements that policy. And there is a separation of politics and administration under this form of government. And the council hires and fires the executive, the council as a whole. Under a strong mayor form of government, the mayor determines policy, carries it out as he or she sees fit. And again, the council, the rest of the governing body, they do not control the executive. And if you happen to have a mayor or county commission chairman that is a poor manager or administrator, then there's not a lot you can do until the next election. However, if you have a professional manager and that manager is not effective or is not responsive to the needs of the community or to the governing body can make an immediate change. As far as the merit system, the manager is responsible for hiring and firing the employees and the department heads based on their merit and their expertise and their education. As far as the strong mayor form of government, the mayor is responsible for hiring and firing the employees and sometimes may not separate political consideration from merit considerations. And sometimes you see department heads or senior staff members appointed because they are friends of the executive or their political allies. As far as the budget, under the council manager form of government, the manager prepares the budget for the entire governing body. And they try to meet objective needs of the community, needs that need to be met during that budget year. As far as a strong mayor form of government, the mayor prepares the budget according to his or her political interests, sometimes with input from the council, and usually during this process you see a lot of horse trading between the council and the mayor. Now let's look at some research done by the American Society of Public Administration as far as comparing the council manager form of government with the strong mayor form of government. Proposition number 1, for strategic choices, officials in council manager governments are less likely to be responsive to the policy agendas of politically powerful groups than their counterparts in mayor council governments. Number 2, executive officials in council governments are more likely to adopt comprehensive policies than their counterparts in mayor-council governments, because you've got professionals, they're looking forward, they're anticipating, and they're doing forward thinking for your community. Proposition number 3, executive officials in council manager governments are more or less likely to adopt policies that direct highly visible benefits at politically important interest groups than their counterparts in mayor-council governments. And let's look at number 4. Residents in council manager cities are less likely to vote in elections than residents in mayor-council cities. And why would that be? Well, less drama, less controversy, better managed tax dollars, better managed services to your residents. Nothing gets people out to vote like a good controversy, as we all know. Proposition number 5, executive officials in council manager cities are more likely to involve residents in deciding issues of local importance than their counterparts in mayor-council government. More open communications to your residents, better communication with your residents. As far as the functionality of the organization, executive officials in council manager governments devote more of their time actually managing the organization than their counterparts in mayor-council governments. Number 7, council manager governments produce less conflict among their elected officials than mayor-council governments, because the council manager system promotes teamwork among the governing body, because they work and function as a whole and as a team. Number 8, executive officials in council manager governments are more likely to adopt innovative policies and practices than their counterparts in mayor-council governments, because you have professionals, not politicians, running your county government. Number 9, council governments produce higher quality services than mayor-council governments. And in number 10, council manager governments are more effective in performing the very basic functions of government than mayor-council governments. Now, why do communities desire the council manager plan? Well, there's several reasons. Sometimes you have poor administration by elected officials, or you can have ineffective and inefficient governmental services. There may be a declining quality of life in your community or physical vitality. It could be because of corruption or unethical behavior by elected officials or employees. Or there might be a lack of leadership and vision for your community. On the bright side, there are many communities who want to have professional management rather than political management of their tax dollars and their governmental services. And then there's other communities, good communities, who want to take their community to the next level, and they feel like professional management is one of the keys. Now, I'm going to give you a comparison of 2 Alabama counties. By the way, in Alabama, we have 67 counties, we have 3 county managers, we have 60 county administrators. Shelby County, which reminds me a lot of your county, is a county that had the first county manager in the state of Alabama in the late 1980s. And it's a very rapid growth county south of Birmingham. Despite its rapid growth, it is recognized as the best run and the most efficient county government in Alabama. And it ranks number 1 in virtually all the good, positive, social, and economic aspects in the state of Alabama as far as county comparisons. On the other hand, we have Jefferson County, which is our largest county, which has Birmingham and 36 other municipalities, including Mountain Brook. It had a 5-member county commission, with each commissioner supervising different departments. There was a lack of check and balance. One commissioner would be elected chairman to preside at the meetings, sign the checks, sign the resolutions. As a result, there was corruption and extremely poor financial management. Several current county commissioners at that time, and also former county commissioners, were convicted of corruption, and several are in prison still today. It filed the largest governmental bankruptcy up to that time, with debts of $4.2 billion. The Alabama legislature, including especially the Jefferson County delegation, got involved, and they mandated that Jefferson County go to a county manager system in 2010. In Shelby County, Alabama, and Mountain Brook, city of Mountain Brook, were used as examples of good government that they went to this form of government in Jefferson County. The county has been out of bankruptcy now for several years. They're rebuilding their workforce, and they're attracting new economic development projects to Jefferson County. Now, you ask, what is the relationship of the manager and the governing body? Well, one, the mayor and city council or parish council, they're the boss. You're elected, they're elected by the voters and the residents of this community to make policy decisions for the community. The manager works for the governing body. And now, under our form of government, our mayor is ceremonial, cuts the ribbons, goes to chamber events, policy head of our community, spokesperson for our community, serves on several several boards like your Regional Planning Commission, your Metropolitan Planning Organization, and your Stormwater Management Authority. There should be open communication between the manager and the governing body, and there should be confidence and respect, and there should be accessibility. The manager should always be accessible to the governing body, and they should follow up on requests from the mayor, council members, and citizens. I always tell our newly elected officials when they get elected, before they take office, I said, you're going to find out you have a lot more friends than you thought you did. Because you're going to be at church, or you're going to be at a ball game, or you're going to be at a party, and people are going to ask you, why is the city doing this? Or why is the city not doing this? And how about this problem? Can you help me with this? And your elected officials, they're mostly part-time. They're not expected to be experts, but the manager and their staff can provide those answers and provide those service deliveries that they need for those citizens' requests. Also, you should meet with each individual council member or commission member as often as they need to, besides just council meetings, because some council members, have more questions than others. You should prepare good agendas for your commission meetings and provide good research policy options and recommendations in the agenda packages. And you should not surprise your governing body if all possible, unless it's a good surprise, of course. And you should always give the mayor and council and the governing body the credit for successes. And then you should try to foster teamwork among the governing body as a whole. Now, how do we communicate with our residents in Mountain Brook? Well, we use our city website, try to keep it updated as much as possible, and we are completely reworking our website at the present time. We do a quarterly newsletter that has Chamber of Commerce news too, and it's mailed out to each resident in Mountain Brook as well as the businesses, and also posted on our webpage. We use our Facebook and Twitter, and we have a new system now called the Everbridge Alert System, where you can sign up for text messages from the city about city events or road closures, etc. And we've had that in place now about a month and a half, and we've got, I think, 750 people who've signed up so far. Our council's always been very good about holding neighborhood meetings with particular areas of the city to talk about drainage improvements, sidewalk projects, traffic improvements, road improvements. We use our chamber to keep our business community informed, and we also have some very good local newspapers who give us good coverage. And then we have about 3 Facebook pages, What's Happening in Mountain Brook Today, Mountain Brook Uncensored, where people kind of follow things and get into discussions. And the police chief and I sometimes will post items on there to kind of keep people informed too, besides our own current Facebook pages. But what are some of the successful management practices that we have put together in Mountain Brook, Alabama, that maybe have made our community a good example of council manager government? Well, one, we have a very strong orientation for our newly elected officials. Usually when we have elections, we have staggered elections. And so we've got 3 incumbents coming up for election this year. But if we have somebody new, they will be elected usually in August, and then we have about 2 months to orientate them. I will meet with them and go over our form of government, how it works, city projects, different types of meetings, issues that we're working on. And then I give them a real big stack of reading materials, budget, city code, land use plan, citizen surveys, etc., to acquaint them with the city of Mountain Brook. We send them to required ethics training at the Alabama Ethics Commission, and also training for newly elected officials by the Alabama League of Municipalities. We furnish them annual reports of city activities. They get monthly departmental reports. We have monthly financial reports. And then we have an annual budget planning session and goal-setting session as we kick off our new fiscal year. And that session will be Wednesday morning at 7:30 in the morning. We'll be kicking off our new budget planning for FY 2019. We have a 3-year paving plan in place. Now, sometimes on year 2 and 3, some roads may drop off or come on, but we are looking 3 years down the road of what streets need to be paved in our community. And we have 180 miles of streets in our city of 21,000. We do citizen surveys every 3 years. And we find out where are we doing extremely well and where we need to improve. and also where the residents think that we need to spend our money over the next 3 years. We have a capital improvement plan, 5-year plan that we update every year to keep it current for 5 years of where we're going as far as capital improvements, what the proposed cost would be, and how we're going to fund those. And then we have an equipment replacement system that was put in place about 35 years ago by a professional city manager named Wayne Campbell. This is where we escrow money out of the general fund operations every year into a depreciation account. Every year we're taking money. So every 2 years when that police car needs to be replaced, or 5 years that detective cars, or 7 years that public works truck, or 15 years when that fire engine needs to be replaced, or every 3 years that our computer, that money's been set aside every year into this account so that those capital items don't have to compete with our operational budget. We have very good land use plan and land use regulations that we keep updated. And I have goal-setting sessions with our department heads. We've done organizational and staffing studies at time for the entire city as well as different departments to make sure we have the right number of people and also in the right area. We benchmark ourselves against comparable communities on occasion, see how we're doing and how do we measure up. I have weekly department head meetings, have us all there together to discuss issues and also to plan the agendas in advance. We meet on the first and third Mondays to plan the agenda for the second and fourth Mondays council meetings. And we email out a preliminary agenda by Monday afternoon, a week in advance to our council to let them know what we are working on as far as the agendas. We try to hire the very best and brightest of our 7 department heads. 5 have graduate degrees. We have very high staff morale, and we have very low turnover among our employees because we pay our employees well, we have good benefits, and now we have good facilities. And we appreciate and recognize that our employees are the ones that really run the operations of the city, and we show our appreciation to them. We try to give very first class and prompt customer service. I meet with each new employee of the city of Mountain Brook, and I explain to them our philosophy of doing business in Mountain Brook and what we expect from them. And then we try to prepare the next generation of public managers by hosting graduate students in my office as interns or the planning office, occasionally in our police and fire department. And then we form partnerships. We form partnerships with other community groups, such as our schools, our chamber, our athletic groups, some of our library groups, to continue to better the community and work together for the better of all. Finally, as far as recommendations to you, I would recommend that you consider adopting the council manager form of government for Ascension Parish, that you maybe conduct a nationwide search with a nationwide firm for a professional manager, and then you give this form of government a chance to work. Because as you transition from a strong parish council form of government to a council manager, there will be some transition. So give this form of government time to work. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure being with you today. I hope you might have some questions for me about my presentation or maybe about professional management for your community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gaston. Okay, what we'll do, as we did last week, we'll bring up the second speaker, and then upon the conclusion, no, we didn't.
We
I'm
ask
sorry.
questions now.
I had to leave out early, I'm sorry. Let's go ahead with the questions now. We started on the right side. We'll start with your side, Mr. Lambert, and we'll move across.
You could have wore a different color tie tonight. Had been.
Well, I wanted you to know that I was not an Alabama fan.
Oh, okay, okay. Tell us a little bit about your training programs that you have established.
As far as the interns or just in general?
In general,
Okay,
especially department heads and.
Well, we've been fortunate, the department heads, and I have by far the strongest group of department heads today that I've ever had. And I hired a new police chief and public works director about 7 years ago, and they are just extremely well. But anytime you come into a new organization, there is a learning process. You may be a very experienced administrator, but I spend a lot of time with the department head, as far as getting them information, talking to them about how that we run the organization. And each department has their own training needs and training options they have available for them. And so I meet with the department heads during the budget process, and one of the items we do discuss is what type of training are you going to be for your employees this year? And for instance, when we had a new police chief, we had a lot more executive training for his executive team that particular year. We have many of our police officers who are all post-certified, and they are, continuing training. We have a fire training tower, we have a pistol range at our Public Works facility, and we also have a police fire training building now. And so we have a lot of training classes there. Our planning department has a AICP certified planner, and then we also have a GIS manager. Several of our building inspectors are certified, and so we look for certification along those areas too. Does that answer your question?
Generally, yes, sir. When you say give us time to work, how much time,
Well,
if we have a transition?
Yes, sir. Well, when I say you need to give it time, don't expect everything to be changed within a year or two. But I think you will see improvements. You could see immediate improvement. If you hire the right person, they come in, they can establish, the authority in the council, in the county manager's office, set the tone with the department heads, look at doing planning, learn long-term thinking, looking at your contracts to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck. So, usually managers are usually type A personalities. They should be well organized, and they should be maybe a little OCD too, so.
Well, and I thought it was especially good that you talked about just solving problems, because that's what you do and should do, I think. Thank you.
And that's one thing, a lot of managers are to-do list people, including me, and we like to scratch those things off our to-do list. It gives us great satisfaction of completing those tasks or following up on that council call as far as a complaint that a resident has. And so we enjoy completing tasks and seeing the community go forward.
Lastly, what is your biggest problem?
Our problem is always a lack of money, I guess you'd say. We have about a $38 million budget, and we are a heavily residential community with not a large commercial tax base. We're in good shape financially, but we do not have some of the large shopping centers that some communities have, like Hoover, Homewood. And sales taxes drive most of the communities in Alabama. Now, Mount Brook and our neighboring city of Vestavia, we're probably the only two cities in Alabama that get more of our money from property tax and sales taxes, because we have high property values, high property taxes, and small commercial tax bases. We get around 17 million of our $38 million budget from property tax, about 11.5 million from sales taxes. School funding is also another issue that we're going to be faced with here very soon.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hernandez.
We appreciate you coming in tonight, even if it was from Alabama. But you said you had 21,000 residents. How many employees do y'all have?
We have 232 employees.
Okay.
Full-time, and then we have around 20 part-time employees, mostly at the library.
In your resume, you listed everywhere that you've been. Mm-hmm. Have you ever gone to a place that had just switched to a council manager?
No, sir. Alabama was mayor council form of government, and Gulf Shores had a mayor council form of government with a city administrator.
Okay.
Anniston, Alabama, where I was the assistant, was a true council manager form of government. So was Powder Springs, Georgia, and now Mountain Brook. But no, sir, I've not been in a community that had just switched.
Okay. And I guess the other thing you thought about keeping politics out of it.
Yes, sir.
How have you been able to do that? Because, I mean, it's easy to say that, but this is Louisiana, and politics is a spectator sport.
Yes, sir.
So it's, I guess, how would you suggest for a city or a county manager or parish manager to be able to do that, going from the mayor, council to the county?
Well, if you go to the county manager system, it's not going to be any question that the county manager is going to control the day-to-day operations. The parish council is going to be the policymaker. And there may be politics, and there may be vote switching, there may be, people, lobbying for different items. But once that policy is adopted, then it's going to be turned over to the manager and his staff to implement it. And so there won't be any special favors for so-and-so, et cetera. They're going to carry out the policy as they see best and what's most efficient. You're going to see the employees hired based on their merit expertise, not because they're friends of, some commissioner or someone else. So that's why you can keep it out. I had a very contentious council, my second council between 96 and 2000. They were a 3-2 split on most issues, and a lot of issues. And that was a difficult 4 years. But I would try to just, keep neutral as much as possible, make recommendations to them, and then once the vote happened, 3-2 or 4-1 or 5-0, it was my job to carry it out among the, staff members.
Okay. All right, thanks very much.
Thank you. Mr. Lawler.
Yes, sir. Thank you for being here tonight. As far as the employees go, what are the benefits for the employees of the parish, from the manager position all the way down to the initial employee that just comes in for their first job?
Okay. Over time, because you're going to try to employ professional people, you're going to see great emphasis on trying to train the employees, increase their professionalism, their knowledge of their operations, and give them an opportunity to move up in their organization. And so you'll see that employees are going to be a key part of running any organization. And so the manager is going to try to employ professional department heads who are going to want to, in turn, employ professional people under them who are committed to good government and public service. And those of us who go into public service, we don't do it for the money. We can make good salaries, yes, but we do it because we want to solve problems, we want to assist people, and we want to build communities. And that's what we go into it for. We get great satisfaction out of doing that.
You had mentioned also, I think you said objectives. You're going to compare yourself with other parishes, or in your case, cities. Tell me a little bit about that. How do you look at that kind of system? What do you compare, and what are you looking for?
Okay. We've done some comparisons against communities like, Brentwood, Tennessee, let's see here, Highland Park, Texas, Mercer Island, Washington, Birmingham, Michigan, Lake Forest, Michigan, Hinsdale, Illinois. They're similar in size, population, some of the social economic aspects, and so we compare against how do we, similar size, although we might be bigger than a few of those, number of employees, number of people we serve, response time for our fire department, response time for our police department, our crime rate, how long does it take to get a permit approved in your community. So those are things that we have benchmarked against, including even our library. We're very blessed. We have a very fine library, and we have benchmarked our library against some of these other communities too. In the library, when we do citizen surveys, usually police, fire, and the library are the top three. And they're just very top. And we have a new library director who's been with us now about 1.5 years, and she's doing an outstanding job for the city of Mountain Brook.
Probably two more questions. This is maybe a little bit of housekeeping in a way. You'd mentioned 232 employees. Does that count police, fire, library?
Yes, sir. Count them all. We contract our garbage, trash, and recycling services, and so to waste management, so we would have more employees. But we run a pretty lean organization.
Okay. And the reason I say that, we have 500,
Right.
and people are going to say, they've got 232, what's going on there?
Right.
But we have 500 with the parish. That doesn't count our sheriff's office, our libraries, fire departments, and all. So one last question. One of the things that we've heard from some of the other speakers are about a county manager, a parish manager, ensuring that all members of the community get the benefits that can be spread around the community. We have some areas of the community, socioeconomic, that aren't as high as other areas. I want to ensure that everybody gets the same benefit. How do you go about doing that?
Okay. If you've got areas that are, let's say you have a lot of minority or low-income areas, there may be some areas that have been neglected because of discrimination in the past, I think the manager and the staff would look at it objective of what needs to be done. Does this area need more street paving this year, or park improvements, or utility upgrades? Plus, there's community development block grants that you can obtain that can be earmarked towards for 3 reasons: eliminate slum and blight, low and moderate income areas, or economic development projects. And so you could apply for some CDBG funds that could go specifically to some of these areas that are underserved and may have low income areas. So those would be what the manager would be looking at, as far as areas that needs to be brought and given the same amount of services, the same type of services as the rest of the county or the rest of the city.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Guzzo.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Remind me, in Alabama, what the percentage of communities are who have a manager form of government, council manager form of government, or in the parish or county.
Yes, ma'am.
setting.
Now, Alabama, we don't have a lot, but there's 15 city managers in Alabama. Mount Brook was the first city in Alabama to have a city manager. It was 1942 when we incorporated. We set up a city manager position. We have 15 city administrators, which is more of a city coordinator. We have 3 county managers, and then we have 60 county administrators. Now, I will say of the 60 county administrators, probably 2/3 of them, are called county administrators in your some of your rural counties, and they're really just a glorified county clerk. But you have around 15 to 20 who are true county administrators throughout the state.
Thank you. When you say that you help to develop policy options, describe to me what that process looks like for you, and then how you would deal, if you were our parish manager, with your council.
Okay. Let's say, for instance, if you had a bid proposal that came before and you opened bids, and you had certain bidders, and the low bidder was not a local person, but in Alabama you can do like a 2.2 if it's a local bidder, and we had a local bidder who was just a little bit higher. Would we recommend to go with that bidder as opposed to the person who was out of town but yet had the lower bid? That would be options we would recommend, and we would look at the specifications to make sure the council understood what the specifications were in the bid specs. Another option would be during the budget process, as we look at presenting to our council coming up Wednesday for our budget planning session. I've already given them the proposed first draft of our proposed revenues for next year, and our revenues are only expected to grow 1.1%, so it's going to be a tight budget. We've got several big-ticket items as far as drainage improvements, park improvements, athletic complex improvements, maybe a pedestrian bridge jointly with another neighboring community over Highway 280. So we may be looking at doing a bond issue. Currently, our city has no indebtedness. We had some indebtedness a few years ago, but we paid it off, but now we may need to go back and do a bond issue. So we're going to look at these options. That's what I would be presenting to the council. When the council sometimes is faced with a rezoning of property, it comes to the planning commission first. They make a recommendation to the council after their public hearing. Our city planning department, they put together a good explanation of all the factors concerning the rezoning, as far as does it adhere to our zoning ordinance and setbacks, et cetera. That's put in their agenda package when they have a rezoning public hearing. And then the city planner will make their recommendation. Should you approve this or should you not approve that? So anyway, it's our job to kind of give the council, the decision makers, good options that they can consider, for as these decisions when they actually vote. And so we try to make that as easy as possible, and we also try to make sure that it's well understood. And then we email the agendas out Friday before the council meeting. So the council has the opportunity to review these agendas, all the supporting documentation, and if they have questions, they have plenty of time to contact me or some of the staff members to make sure they are clear on the recommendations or what's available to them. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Change is a hard thing.
It is.
And so I saw in your presentation that you function as a change agent.
Mm-hmm.
Describe to me how, in dealing with change, a council manager might approach his or her council.
Okay. Well, each manager has their own, style. When I came to Mountain Brook 25 years ago, I was a young man of 36 years of age, and I was 5 years younger than the next oldest department head. Most of them were 10 or 12 years older. The city had a professional manager that I mentioned earlier named Wayne Campbell, and then he left to go to another community, and they hired a gentleman who had a master's in government, but he had never worked in the public sector. He was supposed to have been an interim city manager for a year or two. Well, he wound up staying 6.5 years. He was a smart man, but he let the departments kind of start running themselves, a little independent kingdom. There were several people in our community that was concerned that Mountain Brook was starting to lose ground to our neighboring communities like Vestavia Hills, Hoover, and Homewood. And they got some new people elected in '92 to get the city moving again. And they, for some reason, thought that I would be that person. I was hired in the spring of '93. And the first thing they told me is that we want you to bring control of the operations back into the city manager's office. So I started putting in procedures, having regular staff meetings, having meetings with individual department heads to understand what they were doing and what some of the problems they faced, some of their needs, and what the council wanted us to implement. Because the council had a pretty good little laundry list they were waiting on this new city manager for. So I established control that, I was going to, be the person in charge as far as the administration. I was going to work with the department heads. We're going to set up goals and objectives, and we're going to implement those objectives. And then I would follow up. One thing I think that's got to be really good about a manager, there's got to be a lot of follow-up, because sometimes things can get dropped through the crack. So you need to make good notes. You've got to have a good system to follow up on complaints or requests from citizens, and especially the mayor and council.
Interesting.
And we also, that fall, completely redid our budgeting process. Our budgeting process was not very thorough. And we went through a completely new budget process where it really gave much more detail of how our money was being spent in what areas too.
Very good. So is your community, your organization, merit-based pay, I'm sure, is the standard?
Yes, ma'am. We have a system, most positions have like step 1 up to step 10, and there's a 5% merit raise in between. A few of our labor positions and skilled labor positions, it's only 8 merit steps. And then our council has been very generous. They've usually have always given our employees a cost of living increase. We didn't give one for about 3 years during the recession, but thank goodness inflation was kind of low at that time. But our council has been very generous to our employees because they know our employees do a very good job and are motivated to do an outstanding job for our residents.
Was it a merit-based system when you got there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So have you observed in your work in other places a transition from merit-based, from a general, we're going to just give everybody an across-the-board raise every year, to a merit-based system?
Well, when I was in Powder Springs, Georgia, we had a different system, and you were not guaranteed. Of course, you're not guaranteed a 5% raise even when you go from your second year to your third year, et cetera. Although most people do get those raises, we had a system. It was basically a pay for performance, and each department and supervisor would interview and evaluate each of their employees at their anniversary date, and based on maybe goals and objectives they had established a year ago, or improvements they needed to make, or training opportunities they needed to take advantage of, they would get a raise from 0 up to 7.5%. And so we had some employees that did get 7.5%, but we had a lot of employees who just didn't get but 2 or 3% at the most.
So you don't have
employees. And they did not give COLAs in that city, by the way, cost of living increases.
So I would take it that you do not have an employee who gets a raise, or a job, or even a new employee, because they put out the most signs for the last parish president's election.
No.
That would be ruled out in this form of government.
Yes, ma'am. It would be ruled out.
Thank you very much.
Now, of course, as you said, that one thing that is flawed with the civil service system that most governments have is that it rewards the average or marginal employee and does not necessarily reward the better or outstanding employee. Now, there are opportunities depending on what people do and how they do it. They go above the duty. We can sometimes give them a 2 merit raise if that is deserved. And also at the same time, we have employees of the year for each department, and then a citywide employee of the year. And then when some of our employees are maybe president of the plumbing and gas inspectors of the state of Alabama, we put that in our city employee newsletter. We have a city employee newsletter that we do quarterly too. And we try to recognize a lot of our employees in that for different things too. So we try to make it more of a family atmosphere, because it is like a family. We're all together 40, 50 hours a week, and we do look out for each other, and we're concerned when somebody's child is sick, or somebody is having some marital problems, or their team loses their football game that weekend, et cetera. So.
Those Friday night lights can be hard on you.
Saturday especially,
No, no, absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Okay, Mr. Jarrow.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for being here.
You had mentioned, I heard in the presentation briefly, checks and balances. And I think it goes along with Mr. Hernandez talked about Louisiana politics, but it's not just Louisiana politics. A lot of other politics What checks and balances do you use? What do you find that works?
You know, I'm fortunate. I've not had to tell a council member too many times in my career they're overstepping the line. But there has been a few times I've had to actually tell a council member that that's not your role. Your role as a policymaker, you know, that's the manager's role. And, because sometimes you get people, they get elected, they may hear, well, you know, I don't think our park and recreation superintendent's really carrying his weight, not really keeping the parks updated like they should. We need to get rid of him. And sometimes I've had situations like that. Occasionally, we've had some, you know, requests, which I thought were not often, but maybe a little bit out of line. They were really more political requests than, you know, actually true needs. And I've had to tell a council member no. But really the checks and balances is that the council, you try to educate the council before they come on, what are their roles versus the manager's role, and the separation of the politics and administration. 'Cause we have a lot of bad politics in Alabama too. And I think if we had more cities and counties in Alabama that had professional management, we would see better government. And I think we're going to see 3 or 4 more cities probably by 2020 adopt the city manager form of government. Because we got a bill passed after 2 tries that makes it easier now for some cities to adopt the council manager form of government. And I know at least 3, maybe 4, that are going to try to put it on the ballot next year for the voters, hopefully to approve, change to the council manager form of government by 2020. I've not had, besides the council that was really divided in 1996 to 2000, like again, it was kind of a difficult time. I had sometimes to do a little refereeing between council members. I always try to stay above the fray, give them my best professional advice. Are there some council members that I like better than others? Yes. Are there any that I despise? No. Are there some in the past that I may have not liked? Yes. But at the same time, I've worked with them and tried to make sure I was fair and square with them.
All right, I guess along those same lines, the balance, so you have to have a relationship with, you know, senators, representatives, I'm saying you. So who has to have that relationship, or who has it?
Right.
And how do you balance that, Washington, in dealing with those folks and getting the money that you need?
Well, I have that relationship, but also our mayor and council have that relationship too. And we do not get a lot of federal money. We get some for sidewalks, maybe some historical money, occasionally some law enforcement grants, et cetera. So we don't do a lot of lobbying for our legislators, but we do have an annual legislative breakfast with our legislators, and usually in early January before the kickoff of the legislative session. We have our 2 state senators, 2 state representatives, and usually a representative from our Congress office, as well as our county commissioner, come, and we talk about any issues that might be coming up or we might want to see that might have a positive or negative effect on cities or our school system. And we also sometimes will have legislation that we need passed. So we do have that, and to that effect, they are always been very accessible to us. I will say that. We've been very fortunate. We've had some very good legislators. We did have one state senator several years ago that was not very responsive, and he was finally defeated after his 2nd term, and the person that replaced him is much more accessible and much more responsive.
Thank you. Just in closing, I thought the list that you put up for, you know, your successful practices, management practices, that's really look like some good ideas on there. If nothing else, we need to steal that for sure.
Well, the key to that is that you hire good people, because I would say that at least 5 of the 7 department heads I have are much smarter than I. And so I try to hire very smart, talented people. I'm a generalist, you know, I'm kind of the jack of all trades, master of none, but I am well organized, and like I said, I like to, you know, keep busy and follow up on things. But I've got some very good people who work with me as a great team.
Mr. Trusclair.
Thank you, Mr. Gaston, for coming out and giving your presentation. Thanks for your time. I tell you, it's quite refreshing to see a government leader talk about customer service. I think that's a big deal to me. You mentioned earlier you're a member of ICMA?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How important, it's kind of a 2-pronged question, but how important is ICMA in continuing education for not only yourself but your department heads? And as well as the second part of that question is, how often do you require continuing education for your department heads?
Okay. Well, it's very important to me. I became a member of ICMA when I was a young planter in Decatur, Alabama in '82. And then I went to a couple cities and became an assistant manager and planning director. I attended my first ICMA conference in 1988 when I worked for the city of Anniston. And so I've gone to the ICMA conference since '88, except for 2 times. I had missed 2 times back to back when I changed jobs. But the training sessions they give you there, and in the literature they have available too, as far as what you call the old Green Book series, and in the stuff they have online and webinars, etc., really has made me, I think, not only a better person, but a better manager. You realize that you've got to balance your life work, not only that for your employees, you've got to lead by example, you've got to be able to delegate, you've got to know about the feelings of your employees, what makes them tick, and how that you can run an organization. I'm a credential manager. I was the first credential manager in Alabama, and you've got to go through a 360 evaluation first, and then you have an annual work plan of at least 40 hours a year of continuing education. And there's like 15 different items, from like budgeting to personal development to council communications, communication with citizens, technology improvements, that you choose from. You choose 2 or 3 of those, and you want to concentrate on those every year for that particular year. And so I go through that every year, as far as my credentialing and my 40 hours, usually to my 2 state meetings and then the ICMA meeting, and then I may have some local training too. As far as the department heads, again, I work with them, and they're all somewhat involved in their own professional association as far as training. Our police chief is the president this year of the Alabama Police Chiefs Association. Our former fire chief, who was with us for like 23 years, we kind of grew up together. He was hired a few months after I was hired, and we kind of grew up together. He was retired a couple of years ago. He was president of the Fire Chiefs Association. Our finance director has been president of GFOA, and then our planning director has been very involved in APA. So anyway, they attend mostly these training sessions of their own profession, but then we also have training sessions like this past week, on management styles for different people as far as the department heads. And then the police and fire have their own training, and public works, etc. We have a lot of training for some of our public works employees, as far as safety and equipment operation. We also still do mosquito control, and we do training on those issues. Park and Recreation does a lot of turf grass management, and then, ball field. So we have different training for that the National and the State Park and Recreation Society puts on. So we look at those individual areas where we need to improve, and then like we do, usually a couple times a year, we'll do some in-house training just for the department heads, my assistant, and me.
Gotcha. Very good. And the last question is, in your opinion, as you said, Alabama's not all county managers there, but in your opinion, what's the biggest difference that you think a professional manager approaches his day-to-day job compared to an elected politician?
Well, I think, the professional manager, they want to come in and they want to do a good job for the entire community. And they realize there's problems. We didn't have problems, we wouldn't have government. And they realize there's problems in each community, and those problems need to be solved. And what are the steps that we have to get there? And at the same time, they're looking at how can we improve our community? What are the steps that we need to take today, next week, next month, next year to improve our community to get it where we want it to be? Also, I think most managers realize that you never reach perfection. You may have a good organization, but there's always room for improvement or learning new things and innovation, because we know that technology and things are changing at a rapid pace. And that's the other thing on the training. We try to keep up as much as possible with all the technology changes that are going in the community, and especially how you communicate with your residents. Who would have thought years ago we would have Twitter, Facebook, and all these other things available to us? You would have a public hearing, you'd have your little newsletter, you might have a web page, but now things have changed so much, and we've tried to keep up with those changing times in order to effectively communicate with our residents.
Good deal. Thank you very much.
Mr. Petey.
Thank you, Chairman Cuiser. Mr. Gaston, War Eagle.
Yes, War Eagle.
That didn't taste very good either, by the way, but,
beat Bama.
Tommy Tuberville used to be my least favorite college coach, but that's another story. Somebody a cigar at the 50-yard line, but
yeah, that was a little poor on his part.
Well, we took it out on him though. Anyway, to get down to business, You said that you would recommend a parish or a county manager form of governance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You're recommending this particular form of
Is it the?
parish manager?
Is it the most
Is the-
amendment? I have read over your amendment.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I have read your amendment. It's
Okay.
in here, and I've highlighted different things. It seems to be like an area that you're moving towards that
Mhm.
form of government if this is adopted by the
Yeah,
voters.
this is a better ascension suggested charter amendments. That's what is that
Right,
what
the
you're?
most recent ones?
I
I
suppose.
may not have seen those, but I have a copy in here that I've read a couple of times. I've highlighted some areas, how you're going to hire a county manager, you're going to have 11-member parish
Mhm.
council. The council manager, the parish manager will present the annual budget. It will appoint the department heads, I believe, within 90 days.
Mhm.
And then other things that are going to be required of the county manager or the parish manager during their duties. But so it seems like you're headed towards kind of a model council manager form of government if this is approved.
And when you say model form of council manager, who produces that model?
The League of Cities, the U.S. League of Cities had like a model form that they put out in the early 1900s, and it's kind of a model. ICMA has different models. You got to remember that the council manager form of government, not one size fits all, but the traditional form is that, you've got your elected officials, they have an arrow down to the county manager, who's the CEO, and then underneath the county manager are the department heads. And those department heads answer to the manager, not to the elected officials. And so that's kind of the span of control and chain of command that you have under a council manager form of government.
Now, you mentioned one size doesn't necessarily fit all.
Right.
We have an 11-member council right now. It's my understanding that Mountain Brook has a 5-member council.
That's correct.
And did I read it correctly that they are not compensated?
That's correct.
They work for free? Okay.
Yeah, when they formed the city in 42, a man named Charles Zukowski became the first mayor. He moved down from Pennsylvania, and so to work for one of the local banks, got involved in the incorporation movement in Mountain Brook. And Mountain Brook voted to incorporate. Then he ran for mayor and beat a local person pretty badly to be the first mayor. But he knew about the council manager form of government by virtue of his time in Pennsylvania, which was somewhat popular there in the 1930s and 40s. And he advocated that Mountain Brook have a city manager, first in the state, and that the mayor and council receive no compensation. And that's still true today. Now, I do have a big bowl of candy on my conference room table, and they get a free water, maybe a free cup of coffee occasionally, too, so.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that struck me in your presentation. It seemed to me that you touted as a virtue, and I don't want to misstate it, but people are less likely to vote in a council manager form of governance, and that you're touting that as a virtue.
I do.
I'm going to give you the opportunity to explain that.
Like I said, as I said, that are, not like a big difference, but there would be less people who usually vote in a council manager form of government election versus the mayor council, because there's usually less controversy, there's usually less drama, you have better management of your government services, and you have better use of your taxpayer dollars, is that the manager and the staff and the governing body, working as a whole and as a team, they're addressing the needs of the entire community as opposed to just certain people who voted for me or this person in the last election. So it's more equity, more fairness, and more overall better service. As I said in my presentation, a good controversy gets a lot of people out to vote. And when we've had some contentious elections, not many in Mountain Brook, but it's usually been when we've had some new developments in our community. Some people think it was too big, too large, too much traffic. And you'd be surprised how many people would come out for an election where there was really like one or two just issues.
You had another thing you mentioned that a county manager, and these are certified through the ICMA, I'm guessing, or some other organization, always wants to do a good job for the whole community. You're not implying that an elected parish president in our case doesn't want that. That's not what you're implying, right?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. You've got, the vast majority of people who run for office, they want to do a good job for their community. They want to see their community improve. They want to see right, wrong turn into right. They want to see justice prevail. And they want to see the quality of life in their community improve. Again, nothing against elected officials, but when you come from a background, let's say, for instance, you may be the best salesperson in the world.
No,
but you get elected, to, let's say, running an operation of 400 employees and a $130 million budget. That's a pretty steep learning curve.
Right. Yeah, I'm not trying to be too pedantic here, but
Right.
this is like the third hard sell that we've
Yes.
gotten from the
But
VA.
you
so-
got to remember now, I should have mentioned, I'm very biased in my presentation.
Thank you.
and
Thank you very much.
I really believe in what I do. So you got to filter that out a little bit, you know, so.
I'm probably the hardest sell you got on this.
I
On
got
this.
you.
Okay.
And you need to ask those questions.
Okay.
Because it is a change, and like I said, you need to vet this process.
Yeah. Going back to your council members are not compensated.
Yes.
What about you? What, if you don't mind, I would assume it's public record, but
Mm-hmm.
what's your annual salary?
180,000.
And your department heads, how many departments do you oversee?
7.
7. That includes fire and police?
Fire, police, public
Okay.
works, park and recreation, planning
Okay.
and zoning, or inspection, excuse me, finance and library.
And as far as the hiring procedure in Mountain Brook for those positions,
Yes, sir.
can you describe that to me?
Yes, sir. Under our form of government, actually, the police chief and fire chief are appointed by the council. I sit in on the interviews, I make my recommendations. But let's just say, for instance, when I hired the public works director 7 years ago, and then I hired the, excuse me, the park and recreation director, you know, we seek applications that come through what we call the Personnel Board of Jefferson County. And I go through the applications. I have sometimes set up panels for people to help sit on the interviews with me, and then we'll narrow it down to, let's say, 3 people, and then we'll, you know, interview them again, check references, look at their credentials, and then I will make the final decision. But like when I hired the park and recreation superintendent, I had the council president sit in on the interviews because she's the liaison to our park board.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the park board chairman sit in on the interviews. And then, and they reviewed and looked in the applications. The park board chairman wanted an in-house candidate. The council president, kind of like the person I was wanting to hire from outside. And like I said, but I hired the person from outside rather than promote the person from within the parks. We'd had a 25-year park and recreation superintendent who did a very good job, but I wanted to take the park and recreation department in a different direction.
You're hiring and firing. Can you give us first off, how often are you reappointed? Would be
Yes, sir. Every
right
time that we have an election, and we have staggered elections, and so every time the new council takes place, let's say this fall, we'll have either 3 new council members or the 3 incumbents.
Would that be every 2 years for your
Every
stagger?
2 years,
Okay.
I'm having to be reappointed. Of course, now they can fire me any day. I can go back, you know, they say, what are you doing with those people in Louisiana? They'll fire me Wednesday morning at the budget planning session, you know, so. But, I do not really have a contract. I have what we call an employment agreement.
Okay.
If they want to fire me for, you know, just to fire me, they got to pay me 4 months of salary plus my accumulated vacation, sick leave, et cetera. But if they have cause to fire me, they don't have to pay me anything. So. I don't think I've been close, but when I be fired, I was hired, by the way, on a 3-2 vote 25 years ago, 3-2 vote.
Generally, do you unanimous or, you know?
Sir?
You said you had some close calls. So 25 years, you have been reappointed
I've been
12
reappointed.
times?
I've never really had any close calls, but there was a couple of times, I think, especially between 96 and 2000, that I was concerned that I might not survive the next day.
Yeah.
And then we had a couple issues between our mayor and some of our council members about a development between 2004 and 2008. You'd have to kind of walk on eggshells. So I don't think we got really very close, but you're always concerned that, you know, if you know, sometimes there's so much tension between a few council members at that time, you had to be very careful how you conducted yourself.
Mountain Brook is a pretty affluent community,
It
correct?
is, yes.
Like top 10 in the country, right?
Well,
according to some.
It is very high in some areas. It's very untypical for Alabama. You're right on that. I think our median family income is number 9th in the nation.
9th in the nation. Where the rich folks live in the suburbs across from Birmingham, according to George Wallace, right?
Well, you're right. Now, what we call the over-the-mountain communities, Mountain Brook, Homewood, Hoover, Vestavia, North Shelby County, we are very blessed in that area with a quality of life that the vast majority of the rest of the state does not enjoy. Again, your county reminds me so much of Shelby County because it's, you know, you're getting the spillover from Baton Rouge, some from New Orleans. You got good schools here, you got a good quality of life, and you want to make sure that, you know, your taxpayer dollars are managed properly and that you continue to improve the quality of life. So your circumstances look a lot like Shelby County, and they realized the growth started happening there in the early 1980s. And then they went to a county manager system in the late 1980s, and that's worked extremely well for them despite the rapid growth that they've had. They have very good county services.
And this is just off subject. Shelby County, wasn't that the county that filed the lawsuit that got rid of the voters' right?
Yes,
Section
that's correct.
4B of the vote? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yep. At
That's
one
probably
time,
for
they
Mr.
had,
Garnett,
they
Mr.
had
Garrett.
they have a 9-member commission. They had one area that had about districts. And because of the population growth there, the number of minorities were kind of somewhat dispersed. There was not a need for a minority district anymore.
Well, you bring up minorities. You mentioned discrimination, I think, in response to a question somebody else had asked. Have you hadn't had a real, I mean, y'all over 97% white, correct, Mount
Yes.
Brook? So I wouldn't assume that you have too many race discriminatory.
We've had a few, we haven't had one in probably over 10 years. We did have a couple of employees who filed EEOC complaints against us, and they were dismissed very quickly because we treat our employees fair. We treat them equally. And like I said, race does not invoke in far as decisions on promotions or pay, et cetera. And like I said, we know of some communities who've had problems, but we've not had any problems in over 10 years. And then when we did have those complaints, they were dismissed very quickly.
Well, you mentioned the 200 employees you have total?
32.
How many of those employees, or number or percentage, reside in Mountain Brook or citizens of Mountain Brook?
Probably 5 or 6.
Okay. So most of your workforce is outside of Mountain
Yes.
Brook? Okay. I think there's one more. And this is from my own edification. In Mountain Brook, you got a planning and zoning commission, correct?
Yes, we do.
Are planning commission decisions final, or do they go to your council?
They're final for far as state law for subdivisions.
Okay.
If somebody's going to subdivide property and lay out lots, streets, et cetera, if they meet our subdivision regulations, that is the final say-so. But when it comes to like a zoning amendment, or zoning ordinance, or rezoning a property, they have a hearing and then they recommend to the council, and then the council makes the final decision.
Well, thank you very much, War Eagle.
Thank you. Ms. Burnett?
Again, thank you for coming up, Mr. Gasson. You kind of touched on, well, you did touch on my one question, and it was you mentioned Central Parish and Shelby County, and that we compare. So my question was, how exactly do we compare? But also, what are some of their greatest challenges that they faced?
Well, Shelby County, they're blessed. They have very good schools. Some of the top schools are there. But at the same time, I think their biggest problem is traffic improvements, as far as the amount of traffic that they're having to face there. They've done a good job of promoting economic development as far as now it's not so many people are driving into Birmingham to work, and they've created different jobs, and different companies have relocated. They've expanded their industrial park along their airport area, and so those are creating more jobs. So you're seeing more people now being able to work in Shelby County rather than just live in Shelby County and drive. But traffic would be the biggest one they would be facing at the present time.
And is that because of the planning, or is that because they're just growing so rapidly?
They're growing so rapidly. And they've got a very good county engineer who, matter of fact, was president of the County Engineers National Association at one time. And they've got a very strong county manager and some very good people there. But I think if you, like, when we do our citizen surveys, what's the number one issue our citizens are unhappy about? Traffic congestion. We have a lot of east-west cut-throughs, Mountain Brook, and like I said, and people cut through from Birmingham or Homewood to Irondale or parts of Birmingham. And there are certain things that need to be done. I'm not going to take my council too much to task, but there's a couple of turn lanes that have been recommended at certain intersections to alleviate some of the traffic backup. And our council has been reluctant to push those because it would take some of the additional right-of-way from a few property owners, but yet I thought it's needed, but our council has not elected to do that. That's one of the biggest complaints that we have in Mountain Brook is just the traffic congestion that we all face in the Birmingham area.
That's it.
Thank you. Mr. Dawson?
Well, thank you for coming, Mr. Gaston. One of the advantages or disadvantages of being at the end of the line is you've answered all my questions, and I don't have anything. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Chairman, I have one.
Okay, Mr. Lawler?
Real quick, some of your the other speakers that had come last week, they talked about the ICMA, and I know in my building, top of the floor is the LADB, the Louisiana Association of Disciplinary Board, the Louisiana Attorneys Disciplinary Board, and every attorney I know is scared to get a call from them because that means you may have done something wrong, at least been accused of it. We heard that the ICMA has something similar to that, that they will contact you if something has gone wrong. Tell me a little bit about that. Is that, I wasn't sure if that was just something they were telling us to sell us on this,
Yes.
or if that's something you have to worry about.
We have a very, strong code of ethics when you become a member of ICMA. It prohibits political involvement, and other things that you are not supposed to do or supposed to do. When I first served on the ICMA board as a regional vice president, during my 3 years there, I can probably remember 4 or 5 times we had people who did something, either stealing from the government or got involved in a political campaign or endorsing candidates, which is a no-no. And they would be brought before what we call our CPC, Committee on Professional Conduct, who would then review them, contact them. There'd be a lot of emails and things exchanged, and then they would set up usually a conference call with them. And then they would make a recommendation to the entire ICMA board. Do you, censor the person, a letter of reprimand? Do you expel them from ICMA? And they have an opportunity to come to the ICMA board meeting. We have 4 board meetings a year to plead their case. And so during the time, we didn't have a lot. There's a small percentage of our members, because we're all flawed individuals. And there were some that we actually expelled from membership. And one of the ones that I never could understand, and then I was back on the board a second time as president-elect, president, and then past president, several times some of our members, do you not understand you're not political? You're not supposed to be endorsed in Canada. Or you're not supposed to be running for office. We'd have somebody who might be a city or county manager in a small community, and they would run for coroner or something, or school board of education. We had a man in Alabama not too long ago who was expelled from ICMA because he ran for board of education. He for some reason didn't realize that was a no-no, and he's a member of ICMA, and he was kicked out of ICMA. But we do take it very seriously, the ethics, in trying to have our members being non-political. Yes, we can vote. Yes, we can put a sign out in our front yard of a candidate or whatever. We can have a bumper sticker. But we're not supposed to be endorsing candidates. We're not supposed to be giving money to candidates. And we're certainly not supposed to, behind the scenes endorse, individual candidates.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Gasson, thank you so much. A lot of the questions have been already answered, but as you orchestrated your comparative analysis with Ascension Parish, as we exist now,
Yes.
120,000 citizens, the various process flows within our government here in Ascension Parish, what did you determine as some areas of concern as far as overall quality oversight management and the business of running government of that sort, thinking or keeping in mind that you'll have, if you combine other agencies that's not presently inside of parish government, 1,500 employees. What did you see that was glaring that if in fact you were the parish manager, what would be your first line of attack?
Okay. Well, I can't say I would be an expert on your community. I've tried to read about your community before I came down here, and I've been down here for a couple of days. Again, some of the things that strike me is that, that you do have a lot of similarities to Shelby County, Alabama, as far as your growth, your schools, your quality of life. I understand there may have been some bad behavior by some of your elected officials who may be administrators. And if that's the case, then, like I said, I think that's why you would look at the council manager form of government. As far as these other agencies you're talking about, I'm not really sure what you're talking about on that, but one thing that, that you would do is that you need to have a direct chain of command and span of control of who's in charge of what. And under the council manager plan, again, you've got your 11-member parish council. They're the policy board. Again, they supervise the county manager or parish manager, who in turn then will appoint professional department heads, and in turn below them will appoint professional people to give you the best quality and professional services for your entire county. If there's other agencies that need to be consolidated with your county government, then that may take an act of your legislature. Would that be in the best benefit for the county government and the citizens? So that'd be something you'd want to look at long term. One thing you always need to do with your council is goal set, brainstorm. Where are we going? What do we need to do? What are our immediate objectives? Because one thing about it, you're always looking at what needs to be done today, what needs to be done next week, what needs to be done next month. what needs to be done 2 years from now. And I think that's what good planning that will come about by having a professional staff that will help you anticipate problems and plan for those problems or opportunities in the future.
Thank you very much. We enjoyed your presentation. There's no further comments, questions? Mr. Hernandez?
I hate that. I was thinking about something, and it's something that Mr. Martinez said the other day. Since you've been with INCMA for a long time, say we do go to the manager form of government, and he brought up the idea that we had done this in the past. Guy stayed here for 6 months and then told us we were crazy and he took off. Do you hear a lot of that throughout the ranks at ICMA?
No,
And
sir.
how many?
ICMA, one of the things in our ethics, they prefer that when a person accepts a job, they stay a minimum of 2 years. Now, there are some circumstances where you might have to leave it before 2 years, and of course, sometimes the council might ask you to leave before 2 years, you know. But we expect them to come in and really have 2 years, I think, is the minimum to try to make a difference in a community. There are some cases, you know, where you come in and the manager maybe not has vetted the community or is not a good fit for the community. Because one thing you've got to remember, the average tenure of a city county manager is between 7 and 8 years. And when I came to Mountain Brook, I thought I'd be there 7 or 8 years. And the only job I really looked at seriously was 16 years ago, and I finished second for the Auburn city manager's job, which turned out really to be a blessing. And I had a lot of people ask me to take other jobs, but I've really enjoyed what I do. I was building a great team, and I was a good fit for the community. And you've got to be a good fit for the community. For instance, Vestavia Hills, which is a very nice community next door to Mountain Brook, they went to a council manager form of government, I think 6 years ago. And they went through the interview process, and they didn't like their first pool of candidates. They went through another pool of candidates. They narrowed it down to 3, and they hired this gentleman who had a military background, and then after military, he became a city manager in Kentucky, and he became a city manager in Tennessee. Then he was hired as the city manager of Vestavia. And the first time I met him, I thought, he is not going to be a good fit for this community. Sure enough, 14 months later, they fired him, paid him your salary. And then their second city manager has been with them 5 years, and he is doing a jam-bang great job. So the manager has to be a good fit for the organization, but also the community. And so you've got a lot of things to sell here, though. Good quality of life, good schools, great food, friendly people. And so you've got something to sell here to a
LSU.
well-qualified, sir.
LSU.
LSU, well, LSU, so.
I guess one more, and then I'm gonna let you go. Would you suggest we use a national search firm?
Yes, sir.
Okay, or,
I think you should use, I mean, more than likely, you're gonna get somebody who is, you know, maybe not from the area, which can come in and do a objective, you know, having more of an objective look, outside look. But one thing you can do might help you in your search. You can go through the ICMA database, you can type in LSU. And you might see there might be some people who actually have a degree from LSU, then went on to get a graduate degree, and they may be working as a city or county manager in some other parts of the nation. And they may have the great desire to come back to Louisiana and be, you know, the first parish manager in Louisiana.
okay.
That's something I would highly suggest you do. But I would use a national firm. I think that would take some of the bias out, and that you would have, you know, looking at maybe nationwide. But also you could, you know, you could do some search for maybe a possible LSU or Louisiana Tech grad or somebody who wants to come back to their home state.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure being with you. And I've enjoyed some great food while I'm here too, by the way.
Great.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make a motion for a 5-minute recess.
So moved. Any opposition? Any opposition? None. 5-minute recess. He is a captain.
Let's go, Mr. Vance.
Okay. Okay, at this time, we would like to continue with the meeting. We'll have a presentation. First of all, let's do the motion to
Second.
to reconvene. Move, no opposition. Okay, at this time, we'll have our second presenter, sir, if you mind. Give us your full name and.
Mr. Chairman, Danny Garrett. I am an attorney in Baton Rouge. Just a little bit about my background. I have been in-house at the Louisiana Municipal Association. I've been in-house and general counsel to the Police Jury Association. I've been the staff attorney for the House and Governmental Affairs Committee at the legislature. And since 2011, I've been in private practice, primarily focusing on local government law. I represent a number of school boards and parish governments. And I also currently lobby and provide some consulting services to the Louisiana School Boards Association. So I represent some individual school boards and also work for the association, and which has sort of given me a wide breadth of local government at sort of every level in Louisiana. The folks at A Better Ascension engaged me to sort of help them in the discussion that they were already having. About how would a path to a parish manager council form of government work. I went back and reviewed the existing home rule charter and utilized some of my own experience. Recently, I actually helped draft the charter that Point Capee is going to be voting on this fall. And I had some input into the last two home rule charters that were adopted across the state. It's interesting because my background gave me a view of sort of people have operated under this model, but also there are some police juries that utilize something similar to this, and I think it can work in some circumstances where the police jury hires a parish manager. Now, the difference between a police jury hiring a manager and a parish manager council form of government embedded in a home rule charter is that the latter sets out those authorities for that parish manager in the charter. It's that constitution, that guiding document. With a traditional police jury parish manager circumstance, the parish manager essentially has the authority that is vested in him or her day to day by the police jury. So having that authority spelled out in a charter seems to give sort of a more dependable path and a more dependable circumstance for decision making. Now, certainly the major difference between what Ascension Parish currently operates under with the parish president, parish council, and the notion of moving to a parish manager council is, of course, the parish president's seat. The proposal would essentially eliminate the parish president as an elected official within the parish and replace it with a parish manager, and then go through and set forth what that parish manager's authority is. And much in the way the gentleman from ICMA spoke, the parish manager by the charter would be vested with that day-to-day authority, including supervising department heads, supervising employees, making hire-fire decisions. Now, all that would be subject to policy adopted by the council. So he would have to comply with a personnel policy adopted by the council. He would have to comply with the department structure. Now, certainly he could come and recommend a better department structure, and he would be making the decision about who actually serves in those departments. I can tell you from the discussions, there was a lot of influence on how the school districts currently work in Louisiana, because they are, in a sense, a parish manager council form of government, except for the school district. Even more so since the passage of Act 1 back in 2012, where the school board is the elected body. They are responsible for adopting the budget. They are responsible for adopting policies that pertain to the school district. They are the ones that have the authority to create and close schools, which is that sort of major department issue. But then it's delegated to the superintendent, and now delegated as a matter of state law, to do those day-to-day operational decisions and to make those employment decisions. Now, one of the things after they came up with sort of their base document, in discussing it, there was a notion that there may be a desire, sort of something in between, similar to what they've talked about with the mayor council with a city manager, and that is that you would have potentially some parish-wide elected official, but they wouldn't be vested with the authority of that day-to-day operation, but they would serve more of that ceremonial role. And one of the things that was even discussed is whether or not that would be a person who could then preside over the council. They wouldn't be a member of the governing authority, and they would only vote to break a tie. That's not unheard of in Louisiana. Under the Lawson Act, which is how most municipalities operate in Louisiana, you have a board of aldermen and an elected mayor. The mayor actually presides over the meetings of the board of aldermen and is only allowed to vote to break a tie. He doesn't vote on every item and can't actually introduce an ordinance like a council member said. So that's sort of one of those permutations that's been discussed. Because again, I think what A Better Ascension was looking at least as they were articulating to me, is coming up with what would a structure look like to move from the current home rule charter to a home rule charter that included a parish manager with a parish council. Now, one of the elements that they placed in the proposal that they came up with was that the parish manager would be elected or terminated by the council on a supermajority. The notion being that that creates the likelihood that you have a consensus and avoid sort of that narrow. Now, that is a difference from how the superintendent works in a school system. Superintendents are hired on a simple majority basis. But to terminate a superintendent during their contract term takes a supermajority. Now, in Louisiana, they can only terminate them for cause, but it still requires not only the supermajority, but also cause, which can be challenged through the court system. But that supermajority, to some extent, insulates the superintendent when a decision they make, maybe in their professional judgment, in the best interest of the education system, but it may not be what is politically popular among the majority of the school board. I think a parish manager with a home rule charter protection would be in the similar situation, is they would be making a decision based upon what their professional judgment is, without necessarily having to worry that they would get terminated the next day. I have seen some circumstances in a police jury setting with a parish manager where the parish manager sort of felt like that's kind of where they were at, is they almost had to sort of know the pulse of the jury when they were making their decision. And so even if the decision wasn't the one they thought was the best, that maybe they needed to make a different decision. I thought the example that he gave of, one of the officials wanting a particular applicant, but him believing that the other applicant was the best applicant to choose. That's really the freedom that I think that executive would have. Now, one of the things he mentioned that you would expect someone to serve at least 2 years. One of the provisions that was put in the proposal was that the minimum contract term would be 24 months, and the maximum contract term would not exceed by more than 18 months the terms of the body that elected him. Now, unlike in his circumstance where they have the staggered elected officials, the entire council runs every 4 years. So that was essentially put in place to avoid a brand new council getting elected and then at their meeting in January, before they've even got their own feet wet, having to make a decision on parish manager. Now, certainly they come in and the parish manager they have is most likely going to have a contract that's going to extend for a number of months to give them the opportunity to determine whether this parish manager meets their goal and has their vision and is prepared to carry out their vision, or is he the reason, is he what the thing that needs to be changed. And so it creates that structure of sort of setting it on either side. Now, it's interesting, the 2/3 supermajority to actually make the hire is what we currently have at Bessie in Louisiana. At Bessie, it takes a 2/3 supermajority to hire or fire a superintendent, which is more in line with what this proposal came up with. Now, certainly, you could make the proposal look almost identical to what school boards have and make a majority for the hire and a supermajority for the termination during the term. Now, one of the things that did come up with regard to the contract, because this is it's not just an employment agreement, it's the form of a contract, similar to how a superintendent has. It's for a term. It sets forth all of the elements of compensation. And it also sets forth the expectations and the performance objectives. And having that in the contract is a very objective way when someone's coming up towards the end of their contract or on an annual review to determine, is that person achieving the goals that they agreed to when they signed that contract. Certainly, if you have someone who is missing all of their performance goals or has engaged in conduct that's reprehensible or potentially gets them expelled from ICMA, that would certainly be cause, and you terminate that person during the term of their contract without any compensation whatsoever. They did come up with a mechanism, and a bit from my personal experience. I've seen circumstances where a superintendent and a school board, they're just not gelling, but there's years left on the contract. And it looked like that there needs, sometimes you can work those out, and I've been a part of those before, where you try to work out a buyout. That sort of led to including in the notion of what the contract could have, and that is, if there was a termination without cause, that, you know what, we just decided this just isn't working. It's not that anybody did anything terribly wrong. It's just we just don't think this is working, that you would buy out the parish manager, and what we eliminated in was just the salary component of the compensation. The reason being is I've run into circumstances where all that other stuff gets harder to calculate, particularly when you're talking about retirement system. And in Louisiana, a parish manager, like every other parish employee, would be a mandatory member of the parochial employees retirement system. So whenever you're talking about terminating someone 12 months earlier or 15 months earlier or 19 months early, if you have to come up with what is their total compensation, it gets very complicated to figure out, well, if they worked another 19 months at this salary, what impact would that ultimately have had on their retirement when they ultimately retire from PERS? And it gets just a very complicated number. And frankly, what people end up doing is just negotiating something. And it just seems like it'd be a little cleaner if you had it spelled out. But that way, all the parties go into the contract knowing what's expected, what the compensation is going to be, and what are the mechanisms for terminating. Now, certainly, a parish manager could just leave for a better job, just like a superintendent's leave. We have that every day in Louisiana, where a superintendent gets an opportunity at say, a bigger school system or a school system back where they're from. Now, one of the things that Wood brought up is sort of the mechanism for hiring, and I know the IMCA is a big fan of using a national search firm. The group at A Better Ascension wanted and thought that was a good idea, but also wanted a secondary option of a nominating committee. Now, again, with the nominating committee, it does get, the difficulty is trying to craft something that is not overtly political. And now what they came up with was a 7-member committee. Again, they would all be appointed by the parish council, but one would be from a pool of executives or managers at one of the 10 largest employers in the state, as determined, the State Department of Revenue can tell you who the largest employers are in the parish, rather, I'm sorry. One who is either the school superintendent or the chancellor of the community college. The notion being that person does have that notion of what it takes to, what they're going to look for in a similar executive. 2 would be Ascension residents just selected by the council, and then 2 would be selected from a pool proposed by the chamber, and 1 selected from a pool of nominees proposed by the various Rotary organizations. Now, that was when they were going through those discussions, it was like, how do you write that? And there were thoughts of, well, how do you make sure of this? How do you make sure of that? They added some additional conditions, wanting to make sure that at least one of the members was from the East Bank and the West Bank, because you didn't want it to be all East Bank or all West Bank. Another was making sure you had some racial diversity on the nominating committee, because Ascension does have racial diversity in the parish, and you need to make sure that aspect was in there. So the more there's been discussion, there's thought that maybe that nominating committee might be one of the pieces that y'all look at as maybe refining. The notion being retaining that 7-member, because again, you don't want something that's too large and unwieldy. You also don't want something that's too small, because it's hard to include enough diversity. And one of the thoughts was to maybe reduce the chamber down from 2 to 1, make the council have 3, and then put it on the council to make sure that 2 of those 3 represented someone from a racial minority, and ensure that you have an East Bank and a West Bank representation. But again, those are sort of the details where you can get in of how you want to get a nominating committee. Now, again, the other option, as set forth in the proposal, is just using a national search firm. That has its benefits, because it takes that element of even the notion that the nomination process is politically motivated completely out of the item. Now, one of the things that they did look at to try again to take sort of the element of politics out is to make sure that they set forth qualifications, at least some minimum qualifications. What they came up with was someone who holds either a master's of public administration or a master's in business administration, but require at least 5 years of executive or managerial administrative experience in a city, county, or parish government. You heard the gentleman talk about, you can have someone who's extremely well credentialed or has a great resume, but they don't actually have experience in that administrative portion of a city or county government. And that's a unique job. For those of you that have been involved in this, that is a very different animal than anything someone has ever had. Even, you may be a great plant manager, but it doesn't mean you could be a good parish administrator. By the same token, you could have a degree in government, but if you don't have that mechanism of understanding how departments work and how to motivate employees and how to keep up morale and how to adjust to the needs of the community, you may not be a good fit. And so that they thought that at least set forth those minimum requirements, again, to also create some confidence in the community that the person that was selected was a person that had sort of a base level of qualification and experience that you would ask for. Now, there was debate on the notion of residency, and they certainly didn't want to limit to people who already live in Ascension, but they also didn't necessarily want a commuter. And so the notion is that they put in a provision that would require that whomever was hired would have to establish residency. I think they came up with 90 days in Ascension. The notion being they live here, and they are impacted by the community that they're helping to build. Again, the parish manager will be the chief executive, administrative officer of the parish, and run the day-to-day operations along with the supervision, hiring, and firing of employees. They wanted to make that subject to, because your charter does contain some protections for employees, they wanted to make it subject to, not going full-blown civil service, because as they explained, sometimes civil service, unfortunately, can tend to sort of champion the mediocre. It doesn't always give you the ability to reward those that do really well and to get rid of those that don't. And so, again, they looked sort of at something that's a fairly new invention with regard to school law. When Act 1 was passed, one of the things it did is it addressed how superintendents were going to carry out this new delegated authority with regard to tenured teachers. And so they created a mechanism to let a tenured teacher appeal a superintendent's job action. Now, previously that went to the entire school board, and if any of you who have served on a school board, who know somebody who's served on a school board, anybody who's ever sat through one of those marathon tenure meeting it gets sometimes unworkable. They came up with this process that somebody just thought up. It actually didn't work very well. What ultimately coalesced a few years ago, and I had the pleasure of being part of that, was actually allow those employees to bring that grievance to an actual arbitrator. The arbitration system is used in business all the time. I just finished up one for a client. And that you would utilize an arbitrator, there's a bunch of different ways. There's American Arbitration's a private organization. There are also retired judges that serve as arbitrators. And that arbitrator hears both sides and then makes a determination of whether or not the superintendent's job action was arbitrary or capricious. That would be a similar situation here. So the employees would have a protection against a parish manager if he were simply doing something improper, taking a job action because he just didn't like them and didn't have a real basis to do it. So it gives the employee that level of protection while still honoring the general concept that the parish manager is making those day-to-day decisions without having to escalate it to the council. The next item that they looked at was the budgetary issue. And they would vest in the parish manager, similar to what is explained, the responsibility to put together that initial budget. And that budget would then go to the council, who would then have the ability to review it, conduct hearings, amend it, and ultimately would have the authority to adopt the budget, to which the parish manager would then have to comply. Now, it's interesting because one of the things about this proposal is it heightens the responsibility and the authority of the council in that regard. Because currently, the council under the current charter, the parish president has the ability to veto that budget. There are some parishes and some home rule charters where if there is a loggerhead over the budget actually submitted by the parish president actually becomes the budget. That's the case in a couple of parishes, Livingston, for example. And they had that circumstance happen a couple of years ago where the parish council, the parish president vetoed the budget the parish council had amended and adopted. They didn't have the votes to override him. So what ended up happening is the parish president's budget became the budget. And again, that I think it was an effort to get some certainty in the budget process. But I think as explained by the gentleman from ICMA, Mr. Gaston, a professional parish manager, one, is going to probably provide you with a budget that is professionally organized, as well as he's then going to be tasked with operating under the budget that the council adopts. So it does honor the council's view on what those budget priorities are. Now, one of the things he mentioned, it's an IMCA, and it was a provision that was incorporated into the proposal that was put together by ABA, was that a limitation on political activity. The notion being that the parish manager is supposed to be, to some extent, apolitical, because his job is to give professional advice to whomever is the council at the time. In my former life, Mr. Quazer knows that I once had 105 bosses at the House of Representatives, and what I was tasked with doing there was giving them the best information that I could and draft whatever they asked and put it in a manner that was legally correct, regardless of whether I had a political view one way or the other. And in fact, I do that as a lawyer. I represent a client's view, and I do it in a professional manner. I used to always kind of take pride that it was hard for legislators to actually know what my political leanings were. And I think that parish manager would be in a similar situation, because he's going to have to implement the policy adopted by the council and try to do it in an apolitical fashion. So, and oftentimes elected officials don't have the luxury to be apolitical, because the one thing that elected officials do have to be concerned about is the perception and what's going to happen at the next election. I think that's sort of one of the benefits that a parish manager has over someone who's an elected parish president. You can have an elected mayor, elected parish president, who in their heart of hearts knows what they want to do, knows what the best thing to do is, but sometimes they feel constrained by political reality. But sometimes, I mean, I think it's incredibly difficult to be that one person who's elected to represent such divergent views. It's kind of like being the governor of the state of Louisiana. You know on election day that a majority of the people that voted picked you, and you're pretty sure that a week later, a majority of them think that you're not the right person for the job. But, and like I said, I think that was sort of the way, I think there was a question of how to sort of take the politics out of it. That's one of the things that I think the supermajority provision does, is it makes the parish manager not have to worry that he's going to make one more than a majority of the council upset that he made a particular decision. There is a term, his contract's going to come up, and if on the whole, the entire body doesn't feel like he's done a good job for the entire community that they were elected to represent, that's sort of the day of reckoning, and certainly they have the ability to fire him in other circumstances. Now, one of the things that I did want to touch on is that under the ABA proposal, they did not address the parish attorney's the legal provision at all. They left it essentially exactly as it is. They did make, I think there was one technical change because it had a reference to parish president as opposed to parish manager, but it did not reach into that. Under your charter, you still have the ability to utilize the DA's office, and certainly that wasn't affected at all. Now, with regard to the transition, I think the original notion was that to attempt to have this charter voted on ahead of the 2019 election. That's the regular election for Ascension right now, is fall of 2019. And you couldn't really have it at that time because one of the things is what would you do with someone who was elected parish president? You certainly want the people to know what they're voting on in fall 2019. The notion then being that it would take effect in January of 2020 when the new council was seated. And it had a provision trying to figure out, well, what to do about the parish manager right there in the beginning. And one of the thoughts was and it was embedded in their proposal, was to have whomever was the current director of administration essentially serve as that interim parish manager until you start this process. Because again, the whole notion was it's going to be impossible for a parish council to come in January at that initial meeting in early January and be prepared to immediately hire a parish manager because it wouldn't allow for any vetting or any process. So you would have to have some sort of vetting. Now, again, falling back to one of the things we talked about where there was a thought that would there be a benefit to a parish president that didn't have that day-to-day control but had another function, ceremonial, service on boards, general representation of the parish, and potentially even preside over the council meetings. If that were one of the options that y'all recommended, that may be another option to serve as that interim parish manager, is essentially vest that individual with those parish manager duties until the first parish manager could be appointed. But again, those are details that y'all would be able to hone in on and sharpen. But what was prepared is essentially a template for how to get from what is currently in your charter to a parish manager council form of government. Be more than happy to answer any questions either on the charter itself or with regard to my experiences. Like I said, I've been doing this a little while. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll start with Mr. Dawson and work our way around.
Well, thank you, Mr. Garrett. And maybe I have an older copy of this, but did you say that the contract for the manager was 2/3 to hire and 2/3 to terminate?
See, I believe so. Let me pull it real quick.
Because mine is 50%. The one I have
that was one of the
majority to hire and 2/3 to terminate.
One that I had listed as version 8, just to tell you, they came through quite a few. But again, that would be that's one of those issues that kind of went back and forth. Like I said, with the
So the current one, I must have an older one, is 2/3 to hire and 2/3 to terminate.
And again, that would be the 2/3 to hire and 2/3 to terminate. That's more in line with how Bessie hires the state superintendent. A majority to hire and 2/3 to terminate is how state law dictates with regard to hiring and firing of the local school superintendent.
So, I mean, that would mean that renewal would take 2/3.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That's kind of interesting about the budget, and I'm not sure that, and obviously you spent some time with our charter, but, so, you know, what do you think would happen if we had that similar situation where council made changes, president vetoed, and council didn't have enough to override? What would,
Let's see. I couldn't recall, I don't believe y'all have that provision, but let me pull it. I don't believe that y'all have that provision. Now, in Louisiana law, y'all would default to a general provision that applies to local governments in Louisiana in the absence of that, where what in a sense happens at the end of your fiscal year, by state law, your prior year's budget is deemed reappropriated at each line item at 50% of its amount. That's in the Local Government Budget Act. Now, there is a provision in the Local Government Budget Act that says unless your charter says otherwise. And that's become, I know Livingston has it in their charter. I'm trying to think, I think there's at least one other parish that has it, I just can't recall off the top of my head. But it creates a mechanism where you have something. So what essentially happens under the Local Government Budget Act is you take the prior year's budget, each line item is deemed reappropriated as a matter of law at 50%. Now, we all know, having been in government, that 50% of last year's budget doesn't get you through 6 months of the next year.
Right.
What it does is it buys you some additional months to then come to some agreement. The state is looking at something similar to that, because the state doesn't have that 50% provision, so I'm not exactly sure what happens if we don't.
so it may be stretching it a bit, but what happens if at the end of 6 months you don't have?
And I've never actually had the situation occur, but the advice that I have always given is that your charter always provides that you cannot make an expenditure without a valid appropriation. And if now, granted, in the 50% thing, if your appropriations in one line item start going down, there's a way to amend and move money from one line item to the other. But ultimately, if you run out the appropriations, you become kind of like the federal government and you do a shutdown. Now, the feds never really shut down. They just say they do. They shut down some stuff, but they keep the other stuff going, and they have the ability to just extend the budget without adopting it. But I think you would actually come to a grinding halt. Now, one of the things with removing the veto element, that does remove that eventuality, because ostensibly you're going, I'm not really sure, I've never run into a circumstance where no one could get a majority vote on a budget.
Okay. Tom, I was also interested in the charter, home rule charter versus police jury, or some people call it a commission. So you talked a bit about that, and that could you I'd like to get a little more detail on that, in that if you had a police jury and you had a parish manager, which, I know in Louisiana there are a few of those. So again, would you spell out the difference between, how that's, how that's set up versus the home rule charter?
Sure.
And
it's interesting is because in Louisiana, most of the time when people say home rule charter, they think parish president, parish council. In fact, we actually have a home rule charter government in Caddo Parish that doesn't have a parish president. It's the Caddo Commission, but it's embedded in a home rule charter. They have a parish administrator that is, and the charter dictates how that person it works for the commission. Now, really, the home rule charter law in Louisiana doesn't just dictate what form of government. It's actually any form of government you embed in your charter. The difference being that the default form of parish government in the state is the police jury. And still a majority of the parishes in the state still operate under a police jury. I think it's down to 39 now, with Point Capee coming on board. And under the police jury form of government, there is a mechanism that allows for the hiring of what they term a parish manager. And there are some people that have even used the term parish administrator. but it leaves the authority that that person has is left solely with the individual members of the jury. In other words, they can give that parish manager as much or as little authority or autonomy as they want to give that person. And what they giveth, they can taketh away. So there is no limit. I mean, they can say, look, we're going to vest you with the authority to go do all the hiring. And then the next day they can go, you know what, we decided we want to be involved in all the hiring decisions, so we're going to pull that authority away. So what you end up having is someone to handle the day-to-day, but only to a very limited extent, and they don't really know what their authority is because it can change on a bare majority vote of the jury that they work for. So that's the primary difference between embedding a parish manager council form of government in a home rule charter, is that the rules are fixed. And the parish manager knows what their authority is, the council knows what its authority is, and there's real, and you can amend your charter, but it takes a bit more of a process than just a bare majority vote.
So I know there are a lot of other questions. I appreciate it, Mr. Garrett.
Okay, Mr. Burnett.
Thank you again, Mr. Garrett. We've spoke about extensively about hiring and firing for just cause, and there's things within the charter that protects the manager if he was to be fired. Is there anything what happens if a manager comes in and doesn't understand our culture or can't handle the pressure that they're going to receive? I mean, is there anything that protects the parish or the citizens of someone who just decides, you know what, the Ascension Parish isn't for me, and they just up and quit? What happens with that transition? Are we just left high and dry? Are the same rules apply for the transitioning of a manager?
Well, similar to how there are provisions in your existing charter for someone performing the duties of the parish president in the parish president's absence or vacancy, there are similar provisions with regard to the parish manager. Because within the structure that the parish manager sets up, again, you'll notice the graphic he had was the board, parish manager, and then the department heads. And it would generally be your director of administration who would then step up, or your director of finance as dictated. And you could dictate sort of what that succession is so that you don't end up with a situation where you have nothing. Currently in the school board world, you'll see a lot of school boards will do what's called hiring an interim superintendent. It's not really spelled out in the law, but that's how most of them hire it, and they do that sort of as the placeholder while they are filling the vacancy. So if you're right, if after 6 months the person said, I've gained 72 pounds, I've got to get out of here, I've got to go to a place that doesn't have good food, and they leave, the administrative structure then dictates who serves in the interim, and then that re-triggers the selection process.
And finally, we've heard from now, you're the fourth expert, and so everyone we've heard from thus far isn't from here, isn't from the state, but they operate in this current form of government. With you being a Louisiana resident, with you understanding this form of government as well, one, how attractive would this parish be to people who are in Louisiana but not from this parish? Will we still be attractive if we adopt this form of government? And also, simply, with your understanding it, is this something that you would recommend?
Well, again, I try not to make a political recommendation for a place where I don't live. Now, if you want to tell me about Baton Rouge, we can get in the corner. I can tell you about Baton Rouge. But I think, and if you look at Louisiana, if you look at how many home rule charter governments we had in Louisiana 30 years ago, and then look at how many we have now, that's clearly the progression. And I think it's a notion of trying to find a more modern form of government. I think Louisiana is going through that transition. I think that there are certainly benefits to the parish manager form of government. It's almost embedding it in a home rule charter is almost a hybrid between sort of the police jury, which was a legislative body that would hire someone, but there were no real rules, and a parish-wide executive, which is more like what they call a strong mayor form of government. There are pluses and minuses to both. I think there are benefits to certainly being able to hire someone based solely on their experience, their education, as opposed to having someone who won the election. If you'll recall, a number of years ago in Louisiana, we used to elect our school superintendent. The state school superintendent used to be an elected position. Bessie kind of took that, we changed the provision on that, amended the Constitution, the legislature adopted the statute, and now we have an appointed superintendent, the notion being it's someone that we hire. Same thing with the local school boards is they have that circumstance where they handle that policy issue, and then they hire that person that runs day to day. One of the things I can tell you in the 25 years that I've been dealing with local governments, it's become a whole lot harder to run a local government than it used to be. Even small municipalities are finding that just the day-to-day stuff is much more complicated. And so it's very hard oftentimes for someone elected mayor or someone elected parish president, and they step in to essentially be an expert in all that. What they end up oftentimes having to do is the first thing they have to do is find a really good chief administrator, someone who can serve in that professional capacity and do that day-to-day stuff. And so I guess the political question for y'all is it better to have a parish-wide elected executive who makes that administrative hire, or is it better to have the council make that administrative hire if that administrative hire is really necessary to meeting the very complicated expectations of running a local government, particularly as Ascension continues to grow. And that thing is the bigger you get, the more issues you have to deal with, the more money that you're managing, the more complicated running the parish day-to-day becomes.
Thank you.
Mr. Petey.
Thank you, Chairman Quezer. Mr. Garrett, you said you participated in the drafting of some other charters?
Yes.
How many? 3.
All
in Louisiana?
Yes. Okay. I participated in Natchitoches. I assisted them in drafting their charter, as well as getting it pre-cleared, because that was back.
Yeah, I think it came up with Mr. Gaston and Shelby,
County,
right.
In 2012, just edification, 2012, Shelby County, Alabama, challenged the pre-clearance process of the Department of Justice, and the Supreme Court ruled that the people who were on the list was an arbitrary list, that they had not gone in and said, yes, all the people on the list need to be on the list. So they knocked everybody off the list, and Congress hadn't done anything since.
Yeah, so you still have pre-clearance, you just don't have the list of people subject to it.
Actually, that's the thing is you no longer have pre-clearance.
Okay.
Pre-clearance used to be, in Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act, we'll get in the weeds, but Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act was a list of all the jurisdictions who had had a history of discrimination, at least from Congress's view. A number of years ago, when the Voting Rights Act was, because every 25 years it gets readopted, they left that list exactly like it was. They didn't change it. And that's what Shelby County argued is, there's no evidence that any time in the past 20, 25 years, we have engaged in retrogressive activity, and so we shouldn't be on the list anymore. And so what the Supreme Court ultimately said is, Congress, go back. If y'all want to do this, you got to go back. Now, the Voting Rights Act still applies.
Right.
So if you adopt a plan that is retrogressive, you would still be subject to suit by either the Justice Department or a private citizen. And the last redistricting cycle, I participated in redistricting about 32 jurisdictions through the state. And, one of the things I've talked to other people that do that is it's going to be a lot harder this year because, frankly, the fact that I could tell people there's no way this plan's going to get, if y'all do this, it's not going to get pre-cleared. Now I'm going to have to tell them, if y'all do this, I think it's a violation of the Voting Rights Act, someone's going to sue you, and I think they're going to win. But it does speed up the process a bit that you don't have pre-clearance.
Well, I don't want to get outside of what you're getting remunerated to do, paid to do here. Are you here as an expert on, like last week we had 2 government experts on the form of government. You're here specifically to talk about what, ABA's document or our,
Well, and the thing is ABA asked, because of my experience, they wanted to know, okay, if this is the form of government that we would be proposing, what's the mechanics of making that work?
okay,
And how would it work? And so that's where I helped them in the mechanics of how the Ascension Charter would be amended to achieve that goal.
okay, so you're fair game, we can ask you about
Yes.
anything in the ABA provision, okay. And are you taking a position on what you prefer, or are you just here to answer questions?
I'm not taking a position. I think that I'm going to leave that to the good people of Ascension
Okay.
Parish to decide what
All right.
their best form of government's going to be.
So I'm a little bit unclear, did you participate in the drafting of this particular document that
Yes,
I'm
sir.
looking at? Okay.
What I did is I sort of provided them my experience on how to accomplish what they were looking to accomplish. For example, when they were looking at, well, how would we select someone, or how would that work to have a parish manager? I gave them the aspect of looking at the school superintendent law and how that works, because I have experience in doing that. I also looked at the various aspects of how a charter is organized to make sure that it made sense.
Okay, Mr. Gaston, you were in the courtroom for Mr. Gaston's testimony, right?
Yes.
He mentioned that this was, I don't know if he said patterned or very similar to a model parish council manager charter or form of government. Were y'all consulting, and was a Better Ascension actually consulting a model
I
charter?
didn't have any direct consultation with ICMA.
Okay.
I think there may have been members who were talking to IMCA, and I looked at it more from how to accomplish, how to get, people can tell you if they want to go from point A to point B. Sometimes they're not sure how to get there. And so what my thought was is giving them various examples of how to address this. And for example, using some of my experience when we talked about, well, what sort of educational requirements should you have? Because frankly, for elected officials, there really are none.
Right.
And so when you're talking about embedding a hired person and investing them with certain authorities in the Home Rule Charter, the question was, what sorts of educational backgrounds would make sense? What might exclude too many people? What would maybe not really serve any function whatsoever?
If I address something to Mr. Chairman Cuiser, what are we doing here? Are we supposed to be suggesting changes to ABA, or what do we look at here? Are we supposed to be voting on it next Wednesday, or what?
We gave them an opportunity to bring whatever professionals that they wanted.
That's not my question. What is our procedure? Are we supposed to be voting on ABA's suggested charter revisions before the 31st of May? And if so, are we going to have the opportunity as a committee to compare and contrast and vet this document the way we vetted the current document? That's my question I'm asking addressing to the chair.
As I appreciate it, there were no indications that we were to take ABA's or any other organizations' documents. It's what we come up with.
Okay, and the reason I asked Chairman Cuiser is it'll affect some of the questions I may or may not want to ask Mr. Garrett. It's the only reason I'm doing this. Maybe we can expedite some things. But I'm concerned about the particular provisions in a relatively comprehensive rewrite of our current charter. And what I'm asking, are we going to have the opportunity next Wednesday to start vetting this document, is my question to the chair.
If we choose to do that.
Well, I'm asking right now. Can we take a vote on it?
Are you moving that?
If we don't choose to, then I'm have questions for Mr. Garrett, and we'll keep you till midnight, is what I'm saying. I want the opportunity to vet this document before I'm asked to vote whether or not I'm recommending it to the council. That's what I'm asking. And if we're not going to have that opportunity at some point ever, then I'm going to take that opportunity to expose the provisions of the document tonight. That's why I'm addressing. That's why I'm addressing this question to the chair.
Well, Mr. Dawson, then I'll answer. Go ahead, Mr. Dawson.
Well, I'd like to make a motion that we can put an item on the agenda for next week to consider this. And that gives time for notice, that gives time 9 or 10 days for people to look at it, and we do the consideration at the next meeting.
And I would second that motion.
Any opposition, any further comment on it?
Okay, thank you. Oh,
That's, Wednesday's the
Lambert.
next meeting. Good date.
We have heard from one college professor who has a PhD, had 1 year's experience in the public service sector. We heard from the ICMA executive who was very experienced, did a very, very good job. Sometimes you feel like he was soliciting membership too. We heard from Mr. Garrett tonight, and then we heard from Mr. Gasson, who manages a system of 2,100 people with a $38 million budget. I think we'd hire him tonight if we could, but that's not our object. But I think we would need to do everybody some justice is to try to find a manager with some expertise in someone that has a system more comparable of our size to do to answer some various questions and to provide some different expertise in, before we start talking about trying to vote on things. Does that make sense? Or does that just push the process further along? Because I don't think we need to be in a big hurry.
Again, as I've said many times before, the living document is the charter, the existing parish charter. ABA's documentation is not the living entity. Okay. It's where we're supposed to stay focused on our vision as to what we want to do within the parish charter as far as suggestions and recommendations to the parish council to bring before the electorate, if they so choose to do so. And no disrespect to ABA or nobody else, but that's their mindset. That's their collective thoughts. That's not necessarily the collective thoughts of this committee as we speak today. So we can...
Well, just
go ahead.
Let me interject here. If part of what we're tasked to do is to come up with something, if they decides that we want to have something on the ballot for December 18th, which I don't care. I mean, that's not my baby. Okay. But if we're going to do that, we need to get on the horse, and we got one more meeting. I'm guessing on the 30th. We need to get some sense of where we're going with this. And if there's one thing I want on the ballot in 2018, it has nothing to do with ABA. Okay. But I want the opportunity to vote on that, and there's some things a lot of stuff we've slapped up on the wall here. Are we just committee going to bring up what we think is vital enough to make the cut for 18, and will that be on the agenda on the 30th? And if so, we need to get on it.
Well, before we conclude tonight, bear with me, Mr. Garrett. I was going to suggest that any items that we may want considered on the December ballot, we need to bring that forth to this committee next week, and we vote it up or we vote it down, period. Now, an extension has been granted, so all of the rest of the sticky notes that we have put on the wall, we can still bring those other professionals, in front of us, and we can vet them as we so choose to do so. But again, for next Wednesday, which is we're going to go because of the holiday. Right. We're going to go Wednesday instead of Monday. Those items that we may want to be considered for the December ballot would be on that next week's agenda, and we would vote them accordingly. All right, Mr. Truss.
I want to make a comment and clarification to Coach Van's comment earlier, but the gentleman last week was a county manager for 4 different counties, ranging
I know that.
From 40,000 up to 259,000. So he had much experience comparable to Ascension Parish. And then I think the current job, he's probably looking for some membership, but I think he was more or less expressing the interest that how important it is for a manager to be a part of ICMA for the ethics and the training, more so than anything is what I took out of it.
Okay, Mr. Dawson.
So I think we still have a motion and a second that's pending. If maybe my seconder will take this, I'd like to amend that to include any other items that we want to put on the December 8th ballot. So it'd be, the council manager amendments plus any other items that we want to put on the December 8th ballot.
Okay. Does everybody follow that?
Mr. PT, are you?
I'll second that.
Okay.
Are you okay
We were
with
looking
that?
for a second. Wait.
I'll take Uncle Bill's word for it. There's a brother Bill now. I will second. What I'm sure was a fantastic amended motion. Enthusiastically second. Okay.
Okay.
I wish you'd pay attention like that all the time.
Any further discussion on the motion? Any opposition? Any opposition? Hearing no opposition, the motion.
And I will
hereby
resume, and I'll be
moves
brief,
forward.
Mr. Garrett.
All right,
I'm sorry you
go
had to
back.
watch all that.
No problem.
It's ugly.
He's a
Democracy's
customer
ugly
to that.
sometimes.
Well, they say representative democracy is the worst form of government in the world, except for all of the others.
A couple of things, now that you, other forms of government, let's see, you mentioned that some of the personnel policy will be dictated by the council. I think you said in response to Mr. Burnett's questioning. Can you give me a little insight on how, because it looks to me like there's no, potentially we're getting rid of the Human Resources Department in
The thought was, under the current provision, let's see here.
And let me, I'll try to be
Right.
more specific, and you can go yes or no on me. The effect of this is going to be, would be up to a prospective parish manager to decide how he wants to handle this personnel policy. And he'll make recommendations, and he can do a board of arbitration. Instead of the way it happens now, the protection is you get an appeals board and you go in front of the council.
Right.
Okay. Right. Since we agree on that, I'll move on. You said a lot of emphasis, and I'm quoting you, a lot of emphasis was placed on how the school board works. And I'm assuming that was by membership of A Better Ascension?
Well, actually, when they were sort of asking if I had any sort of examples in Louisiana where a similar situation worked. And
Yeah.
the best example I could come up with is, I think, the school board situation, because the way the relationship between a school board and a superintendent is very similar to the relationship between a parish manager and a council that would appoint them. And now some of theirs is dictated in state law. This would essentially, those authorities would be dictated in the charter. So it was an example that was real to the people in the room, because it was more tangible.
Right. So all of our, and maybe just a question for you, how many school boards do we have, does the state of Louisiana have?
69.
69, and they all essentially are structured the same way?
Yes. The boards are of different sizes, but every board by state law hires a superintendent, and the authority of the superintendent over personnel and over day-to-day operations is actually a matter of state law.
Okay, and where is Louisiana ranked educationally, nationally, if you know?
To hear, some people say 50.
Okay.
But I know y'all are ranked in the top
And that,
7.
and if you have an opinion, is that not a product of our structure of hiring a superintendent, or is it attributable to something else? But some ain't working, right?
Well, and it's interesting, when Act 1 was passed and sort of formally vested superintendents with more of personnel authority, I reached out to some superintendents that I happened to know, and in a number of parishes, they had kind of been doing that more so already. I think you'll find that in many of the more successful school systems in the state, that one of the things that they have in common tends to be highly professional executive staff that, because like I said, up until 2012, state law did not mandate that the superintendent was in charge of personnel. Now, some people had already vested superintendents.
I would suggest to you that it's probably something else they have in common, and kind of yes or no, the wherewithal and the money to hire the best people. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think in some respects, but if you look at the salary for the superintendent, for example, the salary for the superintendent in.
I'm talking about salaries for teachers is what I'm more, yeah.
Well, but actually, and I'll use Central as an example. Central is not loaded down with money but they tend to be a very successful school district. Now, you do have some school districts that, because they have more money, they can put more money into those hires, but generally, you're not going to find a huge gulf, a huge difference in, for example, starting teacher salaries one district to another.
Well, let me ask you this, and I'll kind
Except in
of
some
cut through
very
some of
rural
it.
districts.
You think there's a correlation between the structure of how, and the methodology on how school boards hire their superintendent? Do you think there's a correlation between that and how successful the individual school district is? Or is there no correlation? Because I don't discern any correlation whatsoever. Because we got them ranked 1 through 69.
Right.
One of them's 1, one of them's 69. They got the same system.
Well,
Now, ABA would have you believe that the system of the school board operates under is somehow inherently better. But, you know, number 1 does it the same way as number 69 does
That's
it.
correct.
So, okay.
I mean, that's the mechanism.
All right. On the super majority to terminate,
Right.
okay, and I think there was some difference in how the original document and what it is now, but you said that it would, the supermajority would, I don't know if you said it was wise, but I think you said it was wise to afford the parish, or you said it afforded the parish manager, it would insulate the parish manager from politics. Is affording the parish manager that level of insulation wise, that it would take 8 out of 11 to get rid of a guy? Maybe 6 or 7 of them have just had enough and he got to go, and we can't get rid of him? Is
Well,
that much insulation is wise?
Well, and the thing is this, and again, looking at other circumstances, when you've got someone under an employment contract, the issue being, you certainly don't want an employment contract to be absolute. There needs to be a way to terminate someone, and now in the school board world, it is termination for cause. And certainly, if you're talking about not fulfilling all of the terms of a contract, cause is generally legally a requirement. So the mechanism, the notion of requiring that super majority, I think, gives you it's a level of insulation so that there's not a reaction to a single event that would necessarily lead to a termination. For example, if a parish manager were to make a decision that 6 of the 11 disagreed with, you could make it to where he terminates on a majority, but if you're hired by a majority and terminated by a majority, then I think what you're going to find is sort of less ability to make a decision that may be politically unpopular, but in the professional opinion is better.
So we're just trying to take
the legislative auditor, for example.
We're just trying to take the elective process completely out of government, it seems like to me. I mean, you're not going to let a majority of the elected council members take that action?
Well, for example, the legislative auditor takes a supermajority of the legislature to remove the legislative auditor. Actually,
Well, that's a little different. I mean, you wouldn't,
and
it's
the
not
idea
exactly
being
the
that
same
you've
thing.
got to have some sort of, if there's a buffer between the political decision. Certainly, it doesn't take the politics out. I mean, it doesn't take the elected officials out because it still retains the council as both the only entity that can adopt an ordinance, the only entity that can set policy, and the only entity that can adopt a budget.
Okay. But under ABA's version, they would no longer be able to create and consolidate and abolish departments unless they had a recommendation by the parish manager. Would you agree with that assertion? Because I can read it to you. And this is what we're trying to avoid. I'll tell you what, the committee will do that. You can come back if you want.
That's fine.
I would invite Mr. Garrett back as an expert next Wednesday too, by the way, if he's willing to do it.
I have no problem.
Okay. A better extension, you mentioned the appointment process of the parish manager. I think you said initially it was a nominating committee. Is that what you?
Well, they actually came up with 2 options. One, which would be utilizing a search firm,
Yeah.
and the other would be a nominating.
Okay, that's what, yeah, you said it was a search firm. But you said the secondary option was a nominating committee.
Well, I mean, they
But
just
in
came up
fact-
with 2 options.
Yeah, well, in fact, in the original plan, they only had one option. It was the nominating committee. And that was changed. Originally, it was a 5-member nominating committee. And they changed that to a 7-member committee, and they put 2 actual citizens of Essentia Parish selected by the governing authority. Right, that was not in the original, and the search firm was not in the original either. Because I think that is important.
Well, and I can tell you, the process was not so much an original, I deal with the legislative process where there's an original bill and then you have amendments. They essentially had a working document that they were continuing to revise. And to their credit, I think they were willing to go back and look at provisions of it And it's similar to where a charter commission looks at a charter. You don't necessarily have an original and then you amend off that. It was, you come up with a base document and then you began revisiting and revisiting and rediscussing, because it was interesting to watch as, because oftentimes the first time you think about something, you think this is the best way it should read, and then on reflection, you go back and you discuss it some more and you say, well, you know what, it might work better this way. So it's not so much an original that was then amended, it was an evolving document that they ultimately came up with.
Okay. All right. You said that the, quote, the intention was to have an election before next year. Whose intention was that?
Well, I think that was expressed by ABA because the notion being that, because again, I think it's much more difficult if you have a circumstance where a parish president is elected in 2019 and then takes office in 2020 to serve a 4-year term. And the notion would be that if it was the will of the parish to move to this different form of government, it would be better to do that before you had that parish president elected.
By that
again,
logic,
that's going to ultimately be determined
by
by
that
the
logic, wouldn't the optimal time to do it would be the year after you elect the parish president? By that logic, it gives you 3 years to get ready for it. But that's a comment. That's not a question. Here's a question. The transition from one form of parish president form of government to the parish manager, shouldn't that be spelled out somewhere in the document? I'm saying some guidance, because I went through it. There's no. You mentioned that a CAO would, I believe, if I understood you correctly, the CAO would come in on an interim basis until we can hire a parish manager, but that's nowhere in ABA's document, unless I omitted it.
transition.
And I've only read it once or twice, but not true. I mean, the transition, a lot can happen.
It said in section 1001, says the chief administrative officer at the time the charter becomes fully effective shall assume the powers of interim parish manager until such time as the governing authority appoints an interim parish manager. A nominating committee shall be called into being and appointed by March 1st, 2020, and the process of selecting a parish manager shall commence as provided for herein.
The problem with that is we have to, the parish president is supposed to, according to our current charter, is supposed to appoint and ratify chief administrator. There is no chief, you see where I'm going with it? I mean, shouldn't some of the transition language be much more definitive in this document? Because we had a speaker last week, I believe it was Dr. Nelson, that said the transition is going to take, if you're lucky, a year, sometimes more than a year. I just, but this is the first, have you ever participated in drafting a charter that dealt with a manager position, or was all?
No, this is the first one.
Okay. All right. I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Trosclair.
My questions were actually answered already by another committee member, but I wanted to clarify a couple things to the gentleman to my right and also make a comment. But for the nominating committee, whether it was 5 or for 7, they were all actual citizens of Ascension Parish. I want to make sure that was clear because it was portrayed as otherwise. And then also all the changes that from version, all the changes to a Better Ascension's charter was through community input. But Mr. PT wanted to make sure that he wanted to note how bad our Louisiana school systems are and where we rank nationally. So I just want to make this comment and we ponder on it. Can you imagine how bad it would be if we had a parish-wide elected superintendent with no qualifications? How bad would it be?
Thank you. Mr. Jarrow.
Oh. As a former school board member, I'm just going to say that we have one hell of a system, and we have it because of qualifications and the people in the system, from the superintendent on down to in the classroom, especially in the classrooms, and it's about qualifications, and that's the thing I see here. Is I think it's a matter of putting the best person in the job. And however we do that, I don't know that. I don't have that answer right today, but we'll see. And I don't think 1 through 69 is the same, because the person that has the superintendent in charge that's gonna make the changes necessary to do it right it's all about the qualifications. And we went to the point to where we raised the qualifications of the superintendent for Ascension Parish. They're fourth in the state of Louisiana. If you wanna know 50th in the country, we can sit down and talk about that one, because if there's some reasons for that, and it's not lack of effort in the classroom. I'm gonna tell you, we can put every program you want out there. There's some reasons, and they're valid. I think everybody knows them, but everybody's working their butt off in that system. But I think the system, what I see here is about qualifications, and however we can make sure that we have the most qualified person running our parish, and not somebody's best buddy and the most liked person. That is because I like everybody in the community. We have one of the greatest communities around. There's a lot of good people. I've seen some really close friends get in the job, and it ate them up. It ate them up, and you all seen it. You've all seen it. And there is some opportunities there. I just believe there's some opportunities, and I think we can work together and hopefully come out with what's best for Ascension Parish. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Mr. Cazzo.
No questions at this time, thank you.
Mr. Lawler.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I liked hearing, I'd like to see if maybe you could give me opinion on the national search firm and a committee working together, maybe in a two-step process. Because I've just been jotting down notes and thinking if we could get, and tell me if this would work, maybe it would, a national search firm to bring 7 to 10 candidates from all over the nation into the parish, to bring that to the community, to the citizens, the committee that we had talked about before, and have them then narrow it down to, say, 3 people that the council would then decide on. Is that something that?
Yeah, I think that would
possible?
work under the structure, because the nominating committee could choose to solicit a search firm to bring in, you're talking about, bring in, sort of be that wide net that casts to bring in a larger group, and then have the members of the nominating committee cull it down to essentially send a group of finalists, so to speak, to the council.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hernandez.
I guess the one question, I don't have any questions for you, Dan. I just want to make a comment, and I think it was what Ms. PT was talking about, is on Wednesday, we're going to go through ABA's whole charter and what it took us 6 weeks to do before this date. I guess my question would be to Mr. Chairman, is the 31st the drop dead date, or, and I know we've talked about it before, is the 31st the drop dead date, or is there another date out there that we can kind of take our time? Because this is a big decision, very big decision.
As I appreciate it, the 31st is the date that we have to make suggestions or recommendations to the parish council for any items that we may want to see on the December ballot. Outside of the 31st, I don't think that anything will be on the December ballot. It'll be on another ballot. So
Okay.
that's where we're at.
That's all I got.
Yes, sir. Mr. Lambert.
I don't have anything. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Garrett. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Cazzo?
I'm sorry, I did have a question. When you return with us on the 30th, I am concerned too about the transition language and that it be more clear. So I would appreciate, from your perspective, a recommendation on the language that is more specific for the transition from our current form of government to the other, were the public to determine that that's what they wanted to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Garrett.
Yes, sir.
Within your in-depth knowledge of the policies and principles of the Louisiana Municipal Association and the Louisiana Police Jury Association, what's your opinion and ranking or rating of the present charter here in Ascension Parish, as you have, I'm sure, perused it, analyzed it, and if you can mix those two policy mindsets, the Louisiana Municipal Association and the Louisiana Police Jury Association, with your capital experience, where does this charter stand? How is this charter postured, in your professional opinion?
I don't see any, I guess, glaring deficiencies, any conflicts within the charter, because that's one of the things you do run into from time to time. Now, one of the things in the charters that I've looked at is taking the legislative body, because when you have a charter like that, y'all are essentially broken into an executive and a legislative branch.
Right.
Having the legislative branch get involved in employee decisions, I think, can be somewhat problematic. It's similar to the situation that they had with school boards where they were having these tenure hearings, is that certainly you need to have a check and balance over, an arbitrary capricious decision made by an executive branch official with regard to an employee. There needs to be some check on that. The question is the best check taking that into the legislative branch? And the example I would give is if, we have civil service at the state level, so there's the check. But imagine if you didn't, and so if an employee were terminated by the Department of Transportation, that their remedy would be to go to the legislature and have the legislature vote for whether or not to overturn the secretary's decision to terminate them. I think that can be problematic, involving the legislative branch in what is inherently an administrative or executive issue. And that was, and so I think from just a conflict standpoint. Now, with regard to structure, and that's one of the things you noted, there are varying degrees in the state as to how detailed the charter must be. In other words, should you have certain officials? And a lot of charters do mandate, for example, that you have a director of finance. But then you run into circumstances, well, what if there is not a director of finance? I know I keep bringing them back to Livingston, they'll never get any work there. But they had a situation when they transitioned from the last parish president to the current parish president where the director of finance quit because there were political differences, say. Director of finance quit, and because their charter required both of them to sign checks, they were running into a quandary because the council, at least at first, was not open to confirming the appointee that the parish president had. And that happens from time to time. And I know that's their check that they build into it, is that the department, and oftentimes that department head has to be approved by the legislative branch. But again, that oftentimes creates a circumstance where a loggerhead gets created that didn't need to be created. Now, certainly, if there is no parish-wide elected executive, that gets alleviated because the council is somewhat responsible for the overall operation. And the question is, how does the charter resolve that conflict? And like I said, similar to with the budget issue, most local governments have to fall back to the Local Government Budget Act. Some charters have tried to go in and create a solution. Now, whether or not the solution of having the parish president's budget become the budget is the best solution, that's not for me to say. That's certainly everyone, that's the whole point of Louisiana's Home Rule Charter law, is every community has the ability to style their government the way they think it works best for them. So I don't know that, I don't think the Ascension Parish Charter has been sort of revised much recently, but I do think it's a good idea to have some sort of process where you do look at it. I know Jefferson has in their charter that every 10 years they're required to look at it. Now, they may not choose to do much, but they are required to at least look at it because things do change. Times do change. The expectations of the public do change. So that would be something that I think should be embedded, is to look at that ability to change. But you sort of always have to, because the council can always create a charter commission. So they can always sort of do that. Like I said, I don't see any sort of glaring instances. I think what y'all are faced with, at least in regard to what ABA asked me to help them put together, is the policy decision of which form of government is the best public policy for Ascension Parish, and I can't tell you that. I think y'all have to tell you that, because, again, that's the whole point of the Home Rule Charter process, is so you can craft the form of government you think is best for your circumstance.
Okay. Would you not agree that, conceptually speaking, that elected officials, let's say parish elected officials, are conceivably policymakers?
Yes.
How would you separate the mindset of an appointed and elected official if the policymaking is the top priority and they're within the right frame of mind and proper perspective?
Well, and I guess the issue you have, when you have competing elected, an elected legislative body and an elected executive body, you can run into circumstances where if there is a conflict in the policy view, it's sometimes hard to reconcile. If you, a parish manager is obligated both by the charter and by his contract to follow the policy established. It's just the day-to-day mechanisms are left to that person. Now, certainly there are parish president election circumstances where there is very little conflict with the council. I can say, even all the way back to my days at the LMA, with a lot of municipalities still have an elected police chief. And that creates, so now you have two citywide elected officials and a board of aldermen. And sometimes the conflicts between the two city elected officials, parish president and the chief of police. So I think at least the notion that they're proposing is that as a public policy, it is best to have policy established by the elected officials, and then have administrative officials who carry out that policy not be burdened with the politics of that is necessarily involved in being an elected official.
Got you. Thank you, sir. Mr. Lambert.
Mr. Garrett, in the materials that I've looked over, there was a statement that possibly people that work with an administrator are 10% more efficient than elected with a parish president type such. Do you have any knowledge of that statement?
I don't have
10% being more efficient?
Statistical data on that. That's sort of.
Okay, well, that was just in one of the articles, and I think that's quite significant, 10% on a $130, $40 million budget.
And that's one of the things I'd mentioned earlier is that oftentimes you'll find, and a lot of times people will tell you, that sort of the best mayor or the best parish president is the one that hired the best CAO. I know in my home, I'll talk about my home, Kip Holden got a lot of kudos when he hired Walter Monsour, because Walter Monsour was very adept at sort of making the trains run on time. And so I think that's sort of that notion that if that's what his primary job is going to be, is to hire that person, then maybe go directly to that step. But that's just an example from my home.
Got you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr. PT.
Are we kind of squared away on what we're going to be trying to do next Wednesday?
Let's make sure that we're all on the same
And
page.
one of the things before, I feel compelled to clarify this. Mr. Trusclair says that all of the nominating committee members would have to be from Ascension. It's just not true, according to this document. All the nominating committees shall be composed of 7 natural persons. And the only 2 that must be from Ascension are the 2 appointees that the Ascension Parish Council, the governing authority, would represent. The rest of them got to be chamber members or the board of director members for the chamber and Rotary members and somebody Rotary appoints. And somebody from the 10-2 with managerial or executive employee hiring experience from the 10 biggest employers. I mean, no way can that be interpreted to mean that all of them have to be from Ascension. So just want to clarify that.
Okay. All right, for next week agenda. Before we do that, next week agenda, again, any items that we may want on the December ballot need to come forward. And we discuss them, vet them, vote them up, vote them down.
Should we communicate and propose things, or, because I've got a few that I would forward to the group, in the group email, or what's the process here? Get with Cinnamon, what do we want to do?
Yes, if you would forward that into
To Cinnamon,
the
in the
Cinnamon.
group email, okay.
Right, and then she can distribute it
Okay.
to us for the agenda. But any committee member, please, any subject that you would like to see.
End of the week or so, Chairman Queezer? I mean, we've got to give her some time to do what she needs to do and time to get it back to us. I know Monday's a
before-
holiday.
Yeah, today's Monday.
Today's Monday, but next Monday's a holiday.
Next Monday's a holiday.
Yeah.
So, yeah, please get that into her, hopefully by midweek, no later than Thursday.
Okay.
In the business Wednesday?
Yeah, in the business Wednesday. That sounds good. Okay, at this time.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Second.
Mr. Lawler, Mr. PT. No opposition, meeting adjourned. Thank you.